Rules Committee will come to order, and thank you very much, and welcome back to the Rules Committee in a brand-new, beautiful year. I hope everybody had a restful and enjoyable holiday. I did, and I'm glad to be back. I swam 18 beautiful miles, took up swimming, and I survived. Today, the Rules Committee will consider the Senate amendment to H.R. 3762, Restoring America's Healthcare Freedom Reconciliation Act of 2015, H.R. 712, the Sunshine for Regulatory Decrees and Settlements Act of 2015, and H.R. 1155, the Scrub Act of 2015. As we know, we have been debating something called Obamacare now for years and years. And it's the most significant intrusion into the physician-patient relationship that our nation has ever experienced. It is the number one reason why jobs are being diminished all across this country. Healthcare costs are increasing and plans have been canceled. Despite promises from the very beginning and even today of lower cost, no plan has lived up to the bill of sale. The reconciliation bill today that we're going to talk about presents another opportunity for Congress to halt the increasing premiums and economic stranglehold that this piece of legislation has on our country and that is placed on our economy, and we're paving the way for a patient-centered and market-driven health care solution. H.R. 3762 will save the taxpayers as a CBO and JCT joint tax estimated $317.5 billion and halts the government's funding of Planned Parenthood. I recognize what we're doing here today, not everybody agrees with. The committee will also consider addressing outdated and burdensome regulations. H.R. 712 combines three measures to improve transparency and accountability within the federal regulatory process, specifically closing a loophole that has allowed pro-regulatory plaintiffs and agencies to use litigation as an excuse to enact burdensome and costly regulations that are opposed by the public and that place undue burdens on business and economic development and economic growth. H.R. 1155 will address the growing burden of regulations by creating a blue ribbon commission to identify existing regulations that really need to be repealed. I want to thank Chairman Price for being here today. Obviously, we have Congressman Yarmouth that is with us to equally defend the products that are coming before us today. I know we have a lot of work to do. There have been a lot of hearings on all of these issues. There have been lots of time for people to take a look and see what we're doing, and I'm delighted that you're here. Before we defer to our two solid witnesses, I'd like to talk to the ranking member and yield time to him as he chooses. The gentleman's recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I just want to wish you and everybody on this committee, our witnesses, a happy new year. And I was happy to be back until I saw what was on the agenda today, and the idea that we are going to, for the 62nd time, vote to repeal or defund or otherwise undermine the Affordable Care Act didn't seem like a good way to ring in the new year. But I understand it's a political election season, and that my Republican friends are looking for some red meat to toss to their base, and I guess that's what this is all about. This is not a serious effort, as we all know. This is not going anywhere. The President will veto this, but nonetheless, I guess it's important for you to get the President to veto it, so we're going through this exercise. But if this were a serious effort, you would at least have offered an alternative. But under this bill, I think you mandate yourself to come up with an alternative, but you don't have one in this bill. And then for a good measure, you throw in Planned Parenthood defunding, and which just seems kind of strange because you just passed an appropriations omnibus bill that a big chunk of my Republicans voted for that continued funding for Planned Parenthood, but now we're coming back and you're going to have another effort to defund Planned Parenthood, again, another political ploy, but, you know, we ought to get through this as quickly as possible, not waste taxpayer money, not prolong this unnecessarily. And so with that, I will yield back my time, and we'll move forward here.
Gentleman yields back his time. Speaking of effective use of taxpayer money, Tom Kahn is here. From your side, Tom is a person who I know is concerned about taxpayer money too, and I'm delighted to see Mr. Kahn here today. Gentlemen, welcome. We're delighted that you're here. Obviously, without objection, anything you haven't read will be near the record. Our awesome stenographer speaks Texan and Georgian today, and we're going to find out if she speaks Kentucky, and I bet she does, and she'll listen very intently. We're delighted that you're here. The gentleman, the young chairman of the Budget Committee, is recognized. Mr. Price.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to all the members for allowing me to present today from the Budget Committee. I, too, want to wish everybody a Happy New Year and look forward to a productive 2016. This is an important piece of legislation, and it's a significant piece of legislation, and it's the first time that we will be able to pass a piece of legislation that will do the wishes and accomplish the goals of the American people, and that is the repeal of Obamacare, and put it on the President's desk. First time that that has happened since the passage of this legislation. So I think this is an exciting opportunity that we have to truly represent our constituents across this great land. This bill represents months of work by 7 different committees, as well as the full House and the Senate. It also reflects the concerns of millions of Americans, families, job creators, docs, healthcare providers who are experiencing firsthand the harm being caused by Obamacare. It's harm to the accessibility of care, to the quality of care, and to the affordability of care, and as you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, harm to the economy of this great nation. Under the President's health care law, individuals and families are facing higher premiums and higher deductibles. We all hear stories about that and have constituents call us about that almost daily. They're paying more for health insurance that provides fewer choices and less access to the physicians that they want to see and the treatments that they prefer. Employers are finding it more difficult to provide adequate coverage for their workers. Millions of Americans have been added to a Medicaid program that in many cases leaves beneficiaries struggling to find a doctor or the treatments that they require, and that burdens states with a one-size-fits-all program here from Washington. This is the status quo in America's healthcare system right now. It's a status quo that's doing real harm to real people. And it's precisely why we're here today to talk about how we can provide relief for the American people from the more coercive elements of Obamacare while paving the way for patient-centered solutions to the challenges in our healthcare system. This bill repeals nearly $1 trillion in Obamacare taxes, including the medical device tax, which is a direct threat to the type of quality improvements and innovation that we need and want in our healthcare system. It eliminates the individual and the employer mandate penalties, as well as an Obamacare slush fund. The bill rolls back the law's Medicaid expansion, which has only added millions of Americans to a system ill-equipped and ill-designed to support those already in the program. It repeals the premium subsidies and tax credits, which have failed to control and, in fact, have exacerbated and increased health care costs, coverage costs across this country, making that coverage less affordable and accessible to millions of Americans. The repeal of both of these components would be on a timeline to allow for a new set of reforms that will make the purchase of health insurance financially feasible, and do so in a way that gives individuals and families and employers the power to choose the type of coverage that they want for themselves, not that Washington forces them to buy. H.R. 3762 would also halt federal funding for abortion providers prohibited under this legislation, while increasing, Mr. Chairman, funding for community health centers so as to provide increased accessibility to care for women across this land. This legislation represents a good faith effort to repeal as much of Obamacare as possible under the restraints inherent in the reconciliation process. Of course, we wouldn't be here today discussing how to conclude the reconciliation process had Congress not successfully adopted a budget resolution agreement for fiscal year 2016. Without a budget, there'd be no reconciliation process, and a successful budget process is critical that allows us to address the most difficult challenges that this country faces. And Obamacare and the damage that it's doing to the American people's health care as well as the American economy is certainly one of those tremendous challenges that we face. While this bill would lift the burden of Obamacare, it's only the first step toward achieving a better outcome for the American people. Repealing Obamacare would end the harm that it is causing, but it would not fix what has ailed our healthcare system for years. And to that end, we must and we will pursue an alternative, patient-centered approach to reform that will put patients and families and doctors in charge of healthcare decisions and not Washington, D.C. There are many positive solutions out there, and many have been introduced in this Congress, and I look forward to the House bringing a package of solutions forward this year. So while we're here today to discuss legislation that would repeal Obamacare, we must not lose sight of the ultimate goal, which is to improve America's healthcare system so that all Americans have the financial wherewithal to be able to purchase the kind of coverage that they want for themselves and for their families, so that those with a bad diagnosis, a pre-existing illness or an injury will have access to quality, affordable care, and so that physicians and other healthcare providers across our land and the innovators across the land will have the freedom to provide for the patients and develop better treatments. I want to thank you again for the opportunity to address this committee, and I look forward to this bill coming forward, and I look forward to your questions.
Chairman Price, thank you very much. Mr. Yarmouth, welcome to the Rules Committee. I'm delighted that you're here, and the gentleman's now recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member McGovern, and the members of the committee. I also want to extend greetings. Happy New Year to all of you. It's a pleasure to be here. It's an honor to be here to speak about H.R. 3762, legislation to dismantle the Affordable Care Act and to defund Planned Parenthood. As you all well know, this will be the first rule of the new session of Congress, but I hope it is not a precursor of what we can expect in the weeks ahead. This legislation does not take on federal programs that are broken and badly need reform, like our immigration system, our campaign finance system, or our judicial system, for example. Instead, it seeks to dismantle programs that are working, programs that are helping the American people get the health care they need. The Affordable Care Act has helped expand health coverage to millions who needed it, lowered costs for those who receive it, and has moved us closer to affordable care being considered a right, not a privilege and only enjoyed by a select few. No place is this working better than in my home state of Kentucky, where our previous governor embraced the many benefits of the Affordable Care Act, including Medicaid expansion, and our state exchange, Connect, has been considered among the most successful in the nation. We've seen the uninsured rate statewide cut by more than half, and in my district alone, in the city of Louisville, the uninsured rate has dropped by 81%. Pretty astounding. There are fewer than 20,000 uninsured people in my congressional district of 725,000. Let's compare those ACA numbers to what the CBO says about this legislation. According to the Congressional Budget Office, quote, enacting H.R. 3762 would increase the number of people without health insurance coverage relative to current law projections by about 22 million people in most years after 2017. The office goes on to say that such an effort, quote, would result in a less healthy population in the non-group market and correspondingly higher average premiums. And the CBO adds, when you look past the 10-year score, the effect of the legislation on deficits becomes increasingly negative over time. So this legislation would increase the number of uninsured by 22 million, result in an all-around less healthy public, and produce higher premiums for those still lucky enough to have care, as well as increasing the deficit, federal deficit over the long term. Other than that, sounds like a great idea. But that's not all. This bill also defunds Planned Parenthood. And I have to issue a disclosure here. I'm a former member of Planned Parenthood of Louisville, and I've seen firsthand how important Planned Parenthood is to the people that organization serves, and they serve a lot of people. And I might add that in the organization in which I served as a board member, that organization, Planned Parenthood, did not provide abortions. All they did was solid, basic health care, gynecological, obstetric health care, and family planning, and basic health care for women and men, 5,000 of them on average a year. But nationally, more than 5 million women, men, and young people rely on Planned Parenthood for health care services. 1 in 5 American women have received care at a Planned Parenthood facility. More than 90% of that is preventative, including OBGYN services, life-saving cancer screenings, testing and treatment for diseases and infections, and other important health exams. And anyone who suggests that our already overburdened community health centers could simply absorb millions of patients should Planned Parenthood be defunded, doesn't understand how our healthcare system works. Even the executive director of the American Public Health Association called that proposal ludicrous. But I wouldn't stop with just that proposal. This whole bill is ludicrous. It is not a serious approach to legislating or reforming the Affordable Care Act. And like the 61 other attempts to dismantle the ACA, it has no chance of becoming law. I know Groundhog Day is a month away, but this is like being in the movie Groundhog Day. With that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much for your feedback. Chairman Price, you have, for years and years, devoted your life to the health care of others, patients that you served when you were a physician, and your service to the United States Congress and the American people now as a member of Congress and certainly as the chairman of the Budget Committee. Do you believe in any way that there is a great way to serve people at a lesser cost and give people what they want with health care? Or do you think we're just going to throw people out on the street?
Oh, I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman. Look, there are so many better options that we have as a nation that would respect the principles of health care that virtually everybody holds dear, regardless of their ideological stripe. We want a system that's accessible for everybody and that's affordable for everybody, that's of the highest quality and provides the greatest number of choices for patients. The reason we oppose Obamacare isn't because of the individual that proposed it or even our friends on the other side of the aisle that passed it. The reason we oppose it is because it's doing real harm to real people in the area of health care and it's harming our economy. And I look forward to a robust debate as we move over the next couple of years to come forward with the replacement bill for Obamacare, which is why this bill, this proposal that we have today, would not enact many of these changes until those solutions are put in place. We've got so many opportunities to address the issues where patients and families and doctors are making these decisions and not Washington, D.C. We don't need politicians making these decisions for patients. And that's a core principle that the American people hold dear.
Mr. Price, Dr. Price, evidently there are some financial problems that are associated now across the country with these, if I call them co-ops, if that's the right term, that are financially, I believe, have reached their zenith or their apex in being able to charge before losing people, and they're going broke.
They are.
What's that status?
These are the exchanges that were put in place that the states are trying to pool people together and provide coverage for folks, many of whom had coverage before through their employer, and their employer pulled out of that coverage because of the disincentives in Obamacare. And many of those exchanges, in fact, the one in Kentucky is having challenges. And my friend from Kentucky right here, what he fails to notify folks is that Kentucky's average insurance premium rates increased under Obamacare by 25% in his own state. The premiums are up, deductibles are up. I get calls from my former physician colleagues almost weekly telling me that patients in their office are now electing not to get care because they can't meet their deductible. If you're a man or a woman out there, or single mom, a single dad out there, and you make $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 a year, and your deductible's $10,000, which is routine now under Obamacare, you may have coverage, but you don't have care because you can't afford to make the deductible. This is not a way to provide health coverage for the American people. And again, I look forward to a positive debate and common sense solutions, patient-centered solutions that we'll bring forward this year.
Yeah. And the last point as we continue to discuss this important issue is, and you got to guess about how much you're going to make.
Yeah.
At the time you get on, if you guess wrong, you owe more money.
Penalty.
It just creates a problem. That to me is the employer and the participant, the family participation dilemma. Lastly, boy, if anybody's got a disabled child, get ready. Get ready. It's would not be a chosen plan.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, you know about that better than anybody.
I do know
Mr.
about
Chairman,
that.
may I respond to just the comments
I would
about
welcome
Kentucky?
your response.
About Kentucky, because our co-op did have problems. Our exchange has not had problems. Our co-op had problems. We had a nonprofit co-op that was in this exchange. It lost in its first year $60 million. And at that point, the Congress slashed the subsidy that was put in place to help support these co-ops because they knew they were going to get adverse populations. They knew they were going to get the sickest populations. And Congress cut that subsidy. In the second year of the co-op was actually on pace to break even. They were losing $4 million the second year, on pace to make money, but that because of the lost subsidy, they had to go out of business. Our exchange is alive and well. Our exchange now has 7 insurers offering coverage this year as opposed to 3 the first year. And while there is one company that raised their rates 25%, that's nowhere near the availability of coverage at a lower price across the spectrum of the offering providers. Just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you very much. We do need all the facts. And it is fair to point them up, not just from your perspective, but from perspective that may be in an area that's closest to you. I think what's great about it is, if you like it and it works for you, great. But we should not require people to go to it. And that's the problem. This is an onerous position.
Well, Mr. Chairman, that's exactly what my former governor recognized, that we had the opportunity to customize Kentucky's system to help Kentucky residents, and he's done it. His system provides great coverage. I wish every state had tried to do that themselves.
Well, get ready. There'll be a package near us soon, and Dr. Price is well aware of it and knows that we're fighting one battle at a time. Thank you very much. I'm delighted that both of you have taken time to come back and been most pleasant in your professional presentation today. Dr. Fox?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the time, and I appreciate our colleagues being here. I really wasn't going to say anything, but something Mr. Yarmouth just said sort of made my ears perk up. And it's double talk, I think. It's the kind of double talk that people outside Washington get really frustrated with. You indicated that the Kentucky co-op was on the verge of making money, but Congress cut the subsidy. Now, to me, that's not making money. That is taking advantage of hardworking taxpayer dollars being given to something that is failing. And then Washington bails it out. Your definition of making money and my definition of making money are two entirely different things. As long as the federal government will give you a subsidy, you're making money. That is just how far removed from average life in this country some people in Washington are. You know, Mr. Yarmouth, I don't think you even realize the contradiction in those two terms.
Well,
So, I mean-
would you give me an opportunity to respond?
Okay, go ahead. Let's see if you can dig out
All
of this
right.
hole.
There was a program put in place in the ACA recognizing that certain insurance companies, because it was a new program, were going to have very little experience in setting rates. Therefore, some were going to price their product too low. They didn't know who was going to enroll in the program, particularly the co-ops who were nonprofits set up in a number of states. In Kentucky, the nonprofit co-op, taking its best guesses, set prices too low. They ended up getting an adverse selection of patients. The program that was set up in the ACA was designed to accommodate that because it recognized that over the first few years there would be these situations, and in order to get insurance companies to participate, they would have, the government would help make up that disparity. That program was cut by 90%, and many of the co-ops that existed around the country who had been in the same situation, getting the sickest patients, the most heavy cost patients, needed that subsidy to stay alive. They were adjusting rates. In this case, the co-op raised their rates 20%, or tried to. And so it wasn't an ongoing subsidy. It was basically over these first few years to try and soften the blow for some of them who were getting adverse selection. So you might argue with the whole concept of setting that up, but it wasn't because there was a flaw. I mean, that's not a duplicitous statement. The co-op was actually on its way to becoming a viable provider of insurance. It
With
wasn't.
government money.
Not
Federal
going
government
forward, they dug a hole too deep. And when the money that was actually, they were supposed to get didn't appear, they felt that they had to shut their doors down. Beyond that, again, we have a very competitive situation in Kentucky with 7 more insurers. So ultimately, there's no subsidy being given to them, and they're surviving quite well.
And Dr. Price, I want to let you speak in just a second, but Mr. Yarmouth, you act like dealing with adverse circumstances is not something all private insurance companies do every day. What is insurance? I think that's a problem that has gotten totally distorted in our country too. We all buy insurance for our cars, hoping we never have to use it, and the insurance companies base the rates on their experiences about what people are going to do with this insurance. It's higher for younger people because we know a lot of them have accidents and do things they oughtn't do because of their inexperience. It gets higher, I think, for older people because they have more adverse experiences. So insurance companies know how to do that, and they've been doing it for a long time. And yet you bring in a program the federal government runs, basically, and subsidizes because it doesn't know what it's doing. And look at the failures. Now I'd like to ask Dr. Price, if everything I have read is correct, and I certainly can't read everything, is there a co-op in this country that's operating successfully? All I read about day after day is this co-op's failed, that co-op's failed, that co-op's failed.
Yeah, I don't have that information on the tip of my tongue, but many of the co-ops are indeed failing, and the reason is they don't have the flexibility. Insurance companies have not been given the flexibility to set up the program in a way that works, as you mentioned. The fact is that Obamacare has virtually destroyed the individual and small group insurance market in this country, virtually destroyed it. And so what we hope to be able to do through the bill that we'll bring forward, I hope this year, will be to reinvigorate and reinvent, if you will, the individual and small group market in ways that is much more creative and expansive and allows greater choices and flexibility for individuals to gain coverage, not just in a given state, but across this country. But you got to let the insurers, the folks who know how to mitigate the risk and address the risk from a health coverage standpoint, be able to do what they do best, as opposed to having the federal government come in with a hammer and say, this is what you're going to do, and this is the only way you're going to be able to do it.
Well, I appreciate your bringing this bill to us again. I've made the case over and over, as you have, that what we need in this country is patient-centered health care, patient-centered insurance, not government-run programs. Republicans have said repeatedly, yes, there were some people in this country who did not have insurance, but we had figured out that was a pretty small number of people. I also am reading that there are probably more people now not being insured than there were before this debacle was passed. And I'd like to see us get back to the private sector, get the government out of health care, because I don't think it'll ever be successful with Washington trying to run health insurance and health care from Washington, because they're two separate things.
They are.
And I think that's something else we don't dwell on enough. People talk about health care, and they're lumping health insurance and health care together. Now, I think the federal government's trying to run both of them through Obamacare, and it's not going to work. I point out, and I don't want to belabor this point, but I point out a lot that over the years, we haven't seen homeowners insurance spike in cost the way health insurance has spiked in cost. We haven't seen car insurance spike in cost the way health insurance spiked in cost. And I think there are two reasons for that. Number one is because the federal government is involved so much in health care through Medicare and Medicaid and trying to control the market, and the federal government doesn't get involved in these other programs. And two, because we've overused health insurance over the years, and third-party payer encourages people to do that. And a large part of that has to do with the federal government running so many programs. But thank you very much.
Thank you.
Both of you for being here, and I yield back.
Chairwoman yields back her time. Thank you very much. Mrs. Slaughter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to see you all this afternoon. We could all talk about health care a long time, couldn't we, John? I understand. I heard the best news today that Governor Bevin has changed his mind, and he's not going to kill the health care, which they couldn't call Obamacare in my home state and yours. So I'm really happy to hear that. But I also read just, I guess, last week, a large number of Republican governors planning to expand Medicaid. They particularly mentioned that Orrin Hatch was having trouble with his governor. I think it's here to stay, and frankly, I've never been able to understand the great zeal to take health care away from people. Obviously, a nation that has good health and provides for its people is going to be much stronger. And I think it's here to stay. But I know, what is this, the 60-second vote? Mm-hmm. I used to keep track of how much that cost. I know it cost $24 million a week to run the House of Representatives, and how much we spent on over and over and over and over again. And we all know, sitting here today, that this is supposed to go to the president. He's supposed to veto it and save everybody from what they're going through. We do play some bad games. I'd hope we could start the new year off a little better than we are. So I'm glad you're both here. You're nice guys, but I have to tell you, if you want to talk about flogging a dead horse, trying to kill health care, it's not going to make it, boys and girls. And we ought to get on to the business of the country. Thank you.
Gentlewoman yields back her time. Thank you very much. The gentleman from Oklahoma, Chairman Cole.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It's a delight to see two of my very favorite members, two of my chairmen. I have my chairman of the Budget Committee. I have my chairman of the Bourbon Caucus. I'm a proud member of both. I listen to my chairman of the Bourbon Caucus about bourbon. I listen to my chairman of the Budget Committee about the budget, and tend to vote accordingly. So, but it is two really great members. I just wanted to make a couple of comments, and if you care to respond, that's fine. The first is on something I know a fair amount about, which is the Planned Parenthood portion of this. I think it's important for anybody listening to the proceedings to understand we don't fund Planned Parenthood. There's nothing in anything Congress has passed that funds Planned Parenthood. We have an administration that makes decisions, and through grants, because there's about $280-odd million of family planning money in the omnibus, and about $60 million of that finds its way to Planned Parenthood, which is about a tenth of what they get. They get most of the money through Medicaid. So anybody that tells you the bill funds Planned Parenthood, they just simply didn't. That's a presidential choice, an administration choice. It's done through a competitive process, to be fair. A different president could come to a different point of view. So I think that's important for people to know. Second point, though, relates to the whole larger question of Obamacare, which, like every Republican that was here at the time, I opposed and have multiple times voted to repeal. And I'm not one that says there are no winners under Obamacare. There are some winners. There's no question that some people are better off. But the balance of people are worse off. I mean, and I think the statistics are pretty compelling that people who were happy with what they had are paying more and getting less now. That's just the reality. Their deductibles are higher, their insurance is higher, and we did not find a way to improve for some without hurting the many. And I think that's what we're trying to do here, is find an effective way to make sure that we don't punish Americans that were satisfied with what they have as the way to help others. And there's got to be a different and a better way. I'm particularly pleased in here that the legislation does require that we present an alternative. I think that's something, frankly, I would say on our side we should have done a long time ago. I know my friend Mr. Price, Chairman Price, thinks that. has worked hard on some alternatives. And there are competing Republican alternatives out there. The Republican Study Committee's had one for years that's had, 100-odd, 130 or 40 co-sponsors. So I think we'll get to that point. But I think it's an important point in the debate. Yes, we do know that the president will almost certainly veto it, but that's his prerogative if he chooses to do it. But I think then the responsibility is very clear about who defends this system and who would like to find a different alternative. So this is an important step. It's something when people laugh about we've done this 50-odd times. It's the first time we've gotten it to the president's desk, because it's the first time we've had the Senate in a position to cooperate. And it's fair to point out our friends on the other side in the upper body, or the other body, I should say, have consistently presented a debate from occurring there and going on to the president. That's the only reason why this hasn't been resolved, at least at the presidential level, a long time ago. I do think it's an important issue in the upcoming presidential campaign. I think both sides will make it an important issue. That's something that I think this helps set the stage for both the proponents and the opponents. So it's a debate that's going to be with us. It's an important contribution to it. I thank both of you for being here and helping crystallize the issues so people can see how the two sides differ and where responsibility for Planned Parenthood funding resides, and frankly, where responsibility for the Obamacare resides. And then we'll have an election. We'll see what people think. With that, yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. The gentleman from Massachusetts.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
And, and again, I want to be on record, too, as a strong supporter of Planned Parenthood. Me too. Yeah, and I think, and especially for the work that they do to provide mostly poor women and men, by the way, with the health care services that they need. The fact that we're trying to take that away from people, I think, is unbelievable. But, I think what the American people are really frustrated with, if they're watching this, on TV, is that here we are we have time to debate the repeal of the Affordable Care Act now for the 62nd time, and my friend, the chairman of the Budget Committee, and so many others of my Republican friends here talk about all the great alternatives that the Republicans have. You're in charge. I mean, why don't you bring them to the floor? We passed a bill in 2011 that tasked Congress to pass an alternative. You didn't do it. You passed a bill last year that said that Congress has to, provide an alternative. You didn't do it. We're now bringing up another bill that you task yourselves again to bring up an alternative, and I'm not going to hold my breath that you will end up doing it. But this has become kind of a theater of the absurd, where we are, we go through these motions, so that you can go back and tell your right-wing political base that you're doing something, when in fact you're basically kind of running in place. Look, there is a difference between the two parties. We believe that health care ought to be a right for everybody in this country. I think my friends on the other side believe it ought to be a privilege. And I agree with the ranking member that, making sure that people have adequate and good quality health care is good for the nation. It's good for our economy. It's good for our national security. So we can have that debate. But there are a lot of other things that we need to be doing, from dealing with our immigration challenges. We need an immigration reform bill, to continuing to improve on our infrastructure, to a whole bunch of other things. And I was kind of hoping that the first thing out of the box would be not a bill that's going nowhere, but a bill that actually reflects some bipartisan input, where we could actually do something good for the people of this country. And I guess that's maybe too much to ask. But my New Year's resolution is to not talk a lot about bills that are going nowhere. So if you want to know what my questions are, just replay the camera 61 other times, and you can find out what my questions are. If you want to know what the answers are, you can replay the camera and listen to the answers. But with that, I'm happy to yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. Thank you very much. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
I've made some New Year's resolutions of my own, and I'm going to try to get out of the us against them mantra that seems to permeate this place, because I didn't talk to a single person back home over the holidays who was worried about the us, talk to a lot of folks who are worried about folks who are worried about their neighbors who are struggling, folks who are worried about the employees that count on them for a paycheck, folks who are worried about one another, and no time better than the holiday season to be focused on one another, but it doesn't have to end when the holiday ends. Dr. Price, the theater of the absurd would be defined by folks who would suggest an individual who's dedicated his life to taking care of other people, providing health care to other people, doesn't care about providing health care to other people. I don't understand how in the world we are advantaged by characterizing someone as caring about folks, someone not caring about folks. I want to put it to you directly. When the gentleman who I believe held the seat you hold, Newt Gingrich, was running this institution in 1996, he passed the largest piece of health care reform legislation that had been passed in my lifetime, and specifically, intentionally, with President Bill Clinton, decided to abolish all pre-existing conditions for federally regulated plans, but to leave it to states like Kentucky to sort out pre-existing conditions in state-regulated plans. Where we are today is that folks have said pre-existing conditions are a problem. If you lose the genetic lottery at birth, you shouldn't be penalized for the rest of your life. We care about our neighbors, and we want there to be a place for everyone at the health insurance table. Is that or is that not just the Budget Committee position, not just the Republican conference position, but the Doctors Caucus position and the position of your health care replacement bill as well?
Absolutely, and I appreciate the question and the comments. And I, along with Dr. Burgess and others in the medical profession, spent decades, literally decades, caring for thousands and thousands of people, regardless of their means or their capability of paying for that care. And it is frustrating to be characterized as an individual who wants to remove health care. You know that's not true. They know that's not true. We're not interested in removing health care from anybody. In fact, what we want to do is have a health care system that actually is responsive to patients, not responsive to government, not responsive to insurance companies, but responsive to patients. And sadly, that's not the system that we have right now. We have a system that is responsive to the federal government initially, and then to the insurers, and then the patient is way down there on the list. And we just don't believe that that's the way that this ought to be run. And I'm so excited and enthusiastic about the opportunity to bring forward the positive solutions that we've been talking about for a long time. I've had a bill since before Obamacare was introduced, that called the Empowering Patients First Act, that would do just that, empower patients in this system. Because right now we don't have a system that empowers patients.
I think back to that 1996 reform, and the idea was that states would take care of pre-existing conditions on their own. States didn't, and that's
Correct.
how we found ourselves here. I think when we failed to act, and failed to encourage our states to act, we get what we get in terms of popular opinion. But if I remember correctly, Mr. Yarmouth, Kentucky was one of those states in the 1990s that did try to act on pre-existing conditions. And if I remember correctly, it was a disaster with insurance companies of every stripe fleeing the state, the legislature ultimately recognizing the failure, repealing that bill, and now coming back with what you have described as a very successful replacement program. My question to you is, if that is, as I recall it being, what is the nature of the vitriol here? Why can't we declare victory that President Obama persuaded the entire nation that pre-existing conditions have no place in American health care and they're gone? Why can't we declare victory saying lifetime caps have no place in American health care plans and they're gone? Why can't we declare victory saying unemployed children who are looking for a job in a tough economy, who need to stay on their parents' policy, there's a place for them in the tent, and move on? And why can't we recognize that much like the failures of Kentucky in the 1990s, there are small businesses in my district that were trying to provide quality health care to their employees who can't do it any longer? There are businesses in my district who employ families with special needs children who wanted not any plan, but that one plan that they had, and they chose that company for those reasons. They organized their entire life around care for their child, and that plan no longer available to them. I recognize the successes of President Obama's conversation about health care in America, and we ought to be able to bank those. I don't understand why folks, particularly folks who come from a state where you have recognized failures and you've come back even stronger the next time, why we can't agree to recognize failures in Obamacare as well.
Well, I'd love to respond to your question, and I think that, and your observations are pretty sound. In Kentucky, what they did was basically prohibit health histories from being a factor in offering insurance. They didn't require people to have insurance. So naturally, people waited until they got sick to sign up for insurance. So they all were losing propositions. That happened in Tennessee as well. That's why the individual mandate is such a critical component of the Affordable Care Act, because if you make those guaranteed issue provisions and eliminate pre-existing conditions, you have to have everybody insured. Otherwise, people will wait till they get sick and then buy insurance if they can't be turned down. Your comments about declaring victory on all those points, we've done that in one respect. We have Medicare. And Medicare has no lifetime caps, no lifetime limits, guaranteed issue, all of those things. Medicare works. And if I had been writing the Affordable Care Act bill, I would have written them by myself. I would have written a Medicare for Everybody bill. And ultimately, I believe, and this is not a position of the Budget Committee, it's my own, the reason there is no replace coming from the repeal and replace movement is because the realization is basically unavoidable, and that is the only replacement to the Affordable Care Act, other than going back to some version of 2009, when premiums were going up by 38% in Kentucky and California and Connecticut and many other places across the country, 38% in 1 year. The only viable replacement is some kind of Medicare for all single-payer system.
Well, I think that's exactly the kind of debate that I hope to have. I've been here 4.5 years. We haven't had that kind of debate yet. I mean, to say Medicare works doesn't really speak to my Christmas experience. I was with all of my family members on Medicare. They were all bringing me their statement of benefits and saying, Rob, this is crazy. How can you guys run a program like this? I get all these things sent to me directly in the mail. I don't need replacements for my CPAP machine. I don't need replacements for my oxygen machine. I don't know why all these things are coming. Who's keeping an eye on this? The program you define as success provides critical care to seniors all across this land. But every working American today is paying the highest Medicare tax rates in the history of the country
Would the gentleman
for a
yield?
program that is expected to be bankrupt by the time they arrive to utilize it. And I'd be happy to yield to my friend from New York.
I appreciate it very much, and I really appreciate what you're saying about the importance of the pre-existing conditions and the things that we did. And let me add to that 8 states and the District of Columbia used domestic violence as a pre-existing condition, and women could not be insured anymore. That was all done away with the what I call Obamacare. But one point, I'm on Medicare. I don't get anything like that to change anything. I think there are lots of companies. Remember, there was a time when everybody wanted to get you a scooter, whether you needed one or not, but they did away with that from the federal government, said you cannot do that. But the most important thing that I think I need to say to you about the Medicare plus what we used to have is the overhead for Medicare is 2%. The overhead for private health care with insurance was something about 28. If we had done Medicare for all, I believe that we would. I agree with you, John. I think we would have been better off to really do that.
Reclaiming my
because
time,
Medicare
I
has worked,
I
we
would
just
stipulate,
expand
I would stipulate for my friend that I don't believe there's a single monopoly organization in the country that doesn't have lower overhead costs than competitive organizations. I don't think there's one, because when you don't have to compete for business and there's an unlimited supply of money coming in to you, you get to make different decisions. I'm only saying that there's not a member on this dais that believes we can leave Medicare alone and keep our promises to American taxpayers. We
can
can't.
always
The
improve.
trustees that we've empowered to take care of the Medicare Trust Fund tell us year after year after year that the window is getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and yet our go-to plan in so many of these debates that don't get into the details that are hard, but stay up there at the level of political rhetoric that is so easy, is let's just put
But-
everybody
well,
into Medicare.
well-
It does not work. But I would say to my friend, I wasn't trying to start that healthcare debate here. I was trying to say that
Well, we better have it
perhaps,
somewhere, 'cause all
perhaps
we
we
ever do is
deserve better
repeal.
from one another
Well,
than
let
to
me-
characterize folks
I'm sorry that none of you voted for the health care
that,
bill.
as I have reclaimed my time, I would say to my friend that I think we deserve better from one another than to characterize folks who want to protect life as those who want to take health care away from low-income men and women across this country. I think we deserve better from one another than to characterize folks who don't like federal mandates of insurance policies, of folks who still want everyone to have access to insurance policies. And I'd go a step further, Dr. Price. I mean, you raised the issue of these high-deductible policies. I see that, too. The free healthcare clinics in my district say, Rob, we have twice as much business post-Obamacare than we did pre-Obamacare, because folks have walked in the door and said, I have an Obamacare policy, but I might as well not, because I can't meet the deductible it has anyway. But going back to 1996 and Newt Gingrich and Bill Clinton, Republicans were pushing medical savings accounts hard. We've been talking about the importance of getting out of first dollar coverage into high deductible policies for a long, long time. President's health care bill has moved us in that direction. It just forgot about the part about how folks need help getting to that deductible. We need to get patients, as you have said, in charge of their own health care. I just see so many opportunities. And I have to say thank you to you, because I sit up here with the gentleman from Massachusetts day in and day out, and I love him. I love him because he cares about people, and he speaks up on people's behalf day in and day out. But I could just replay his comments from the last 62 hearings, because they are always exactly the same. They're dismissive of the 9 times we've sent a bill to President Obama that he signed to correct problems in the president's health care bill. But this is the first time in 5 years that we're sending a bill to the president's desk that represents not the will of the right-wing base, as my friend put it, but go look at any summary of polling anywhere across the country. I use Real Clear Politics. You use whichever one you want. It represents the will of the majority of the American people. Not to dismantle everything and do nothing, but to dismantle everything and get it done better, as Kentucky itself
Gentlemen,
has
yield for
done.
1 second.
Be happy to yield to my friend
Two
from
things. If it
Massachusetts.
was the will of the majority of the American people, Mitt Romney would be president now and not Barack Obama. And just secondly, while my comments may sound the same, if I repeated those 62, your comments sound the same too, but a little longer than mine, that's all.
I appreciate my friend's joviality. I just see opportunity. I don't. I talk to a lot of folks in politics who are going to write off 2016 as being a year of rhetoric and not a year of action.
Rob,
I
would
think
you
we're
let me
better.
have another
I
whack
think
at
we're
it?
better than that. I think that we have a real opportunity here. And for this to be the first bill out of the gate, I would say to the Budget Committee Chairman, is a big deal to me. We should have had this debate the first time. The process should have worked the first time. And if not, then the second time. And if not, then the third time. And the shame in this
You're hoping for
institution
the
is that
67th.
it took 62 times for the will of the people to make its way to the president's desk. The fact that folks
What
prevent us
people?
from having this
People.
conversation.
Well,
I would say to my friend from New York, the fact that she has to ask what people
No,
makes the point that
I'm
my
not-
friend
I'm
from
not
North Carolina
hearing all
made,
those
made
Well,
earlier.
let me
It is-
let
it
me
is
sum up.
I would ask my friend to start 2016 on a good note.
Gentlemen, yield.
Let me just say
Gentlewoman,
one
yield.
sentence,
Gentlewoman,
Rob.
yield, please.
I really need to do
Gentlewoman,
it.
yield, please. The stenographers who are here are attempting to write down.
They're doing
people.
great.
And they are doing great. But it's hard for them to do great when we talk over
But
each other.
I
And so
wa-
I would ask the gentlewoman, just hold on just a second. The gentleman controls the time. He is one of the most generous young men I've ever met. He always gives people an equal opportunity during his opportunity and time, and I'm sure he will. But let's please not talk over each other. That's my request, and I would make that request
right.
on behalf of our stenographers so that we can accurately listen to each other. Thank you very much. The gentleman
Rob,
from
would you
Georgia.
yield to me for 1 second?
I'd be happy to yield to my friend
I
from New York.
appreciate it. I just want to point out again, as we did, that Governor Bevin was elected in November, took office this week, I guess, did he not? since December. But it's only taken him a month to discover that if he takes all that health care away from all those people in Kentucky, they're not going to be pleased. And I think that that's something we might all take under advisement anyway.
Reclaiming
And try to
my
understand
time,
that.
I would ask the
Because
Budget
that's what he
Committee,
ran on,
reclaiming
as I
my time
understand.
from my friend,
Excuse me.
I would ask my,
Excuse me.
pardon me, Mr. Chair.
I would ask that all the members of this committee please respect the gentle person, whoever that might be, that has the time. And when you yield back the time, you give back the time. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
I would just ask my chairman on the Budget Committee and a member of the Ways and Means Committee, is there any set of circumstances, any policy discussions going on that I'm unaware of that are dealing with taking health care away from patients as opposed to empowering patients to have access to that health care?
Not a one, Mr. Woodall, and I appreciate that because this is one of those canards that is just so false, so false. What we desire to do, as you well know, is to make certain that every American has access to the kind of coverage and care that they want. Our friends on the other side talk like Obamacare has already accomplished universal coverage, that has got everybody with coverage. As you know, there are over 30 million people still without coverage. That's not the policy, that's not the program that we would put in place. We believe that there ought to be appropriate incentives for individuals to purchase coverage and a financial wherewithal to be able to purchase it, as opposed to having a hammer come in from the federal government and say, this is what you've got to buy and this is the way you've got to do it.
Yeah, I fault my Republican colleagues for not recognizing some successes. I fault my Democratic colleagues for not recognizing obvious failures, and I credit you with bringing this bill before us today. I'm grateful to you for that. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Yields back to the gentleman, Florida Judge Hastings.
Thank you very much,
Time.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, you know, I'll begin my remarks by saying to our colleagues on the Rules Committee that I apologize for some repetition, but it's necessary since it's a new year for me to say a couple of things. One, in 1992, when I ran for Congress, I ran on a platform of universal health care. I believed that then, and I believe it now. I think that every American should have a right to have health care. Now, for 22 years, coming up on 22, this is my 11th term, we have had virtually the same argument over and over again. And it's regrettable that we would start the new year in a partisan manner that can only lead to acrimony. I had great hope that we would come here with new ideas and new resolve to do things in a bold fashion for the American people. But now that the debate over the omnibus is over and no longer dominating the news, the House will consider the amended budget reconciliation bill that the Senate passed on December 3rd, and that vote was 52 to 47, aware you're doing this, aware that you can't override a veto. So Republicans acknowledge that the intent of this purely political bill is to deliver on years of campaign promises or to send a repeal of the Affordable Care Act to the president. The one thing that I know is repetition that I say to you, when I advocated universal health care, I did not know Barack Obama's name. And we came here, and you have been successful in your messaging. To many, it's not looked upon as praiseworthy when you say Obamacare. You started it as a nuance in a way that was being critical not only of the policy, but of the person that happens to be president. I have said to you all before, in my view, we have not gone far enough with reference to health care, and toward that end, rather than it being Obamacare, since I was here and worked on it, as did Ms. Slaughter, Mr. McGovern, you, Mr. Sessions, and several others of us, long before Dr. Price came to Congress, long before Mr. Yarmouth came to Congress, we were working on it. So I'd like to start calling it Hastings/Obamacare, so that we can have it referenced that way. 22 years ago, 42 million Americans did not have health insurance. That was 22 years ago when I came here. Now, the thing that would be alarming to the Republicans, and sometimes people ought to do things like this, is if the president didn't veto this measure. My question to you, Dr. Price, is do you feel that you would be left with a workable health program? And the second portion, if the president did not repeal this measure, and the second portion of that, would it not have been better to come here with one of those proposals, or several of them? I think you put it that you'd be back with a package of solutions. This is after voting 2 times to tell yourselves that you were going to have an alternative, and then come here with legislation that has built in it yet another time that you're going to have an alternative. So perhaps you can tell us when that alternative is going to be put on the table and why it isn't here today, because there are going to be people, if this measure were to become law, that would not have insurance. And it's just that simple. It doesn't require a whole lot. And go ahead and respond to me. What would be workable if this law, as you propose it, were to pass?
Well, I appreciate the question, because what this proposal does, what this bill does, and what will go to the president's desk is a proposal that would not take anybody's insurance away from them right now, as opposed to
that right now.
That's exactly right, because it gives.
When would it take it away, Dr.
We're not going to take away anything, because what we're going to do is work to fashion a patient-centered system. And the gentleman will be pleased to know that, in fact, there are many provisions of this legislation that are bipartisan. The reduction of the Prevention and Public Health Fund had 147 Democrats support that when it came to the floor of the House. The delay of the individual mandate, 27 Democrats supported that. The employer mandate, 35 Democrats supported that. The repeal of the medical device tax, 46 Democrats support that. So there are significant portions of this that are bipartisan.
Reclaiming my time. EventID, as my good friend, and he is my good friend from Georgia, pointed out, that there are things that we should declare victory about in the Affordable Care Act, and there are things in the Affordable Care Act that need to be fixed. And to my way of thinking, a more sensible approach would be for us to work on the fixes rather than start all over again. And if you were going to start all over again, why didn't you start over again today? And that's what I don't understand. You're going to offer to repeal something, and then you say that this law allows us to work along the way to protect people. I don't see it that way, Doc, and I find it regrettable. Let me ask another question. 54% of Planned Parenthood facilities are located in rural, and I represent some of those rural areas of America, or medically underserved areas. And I represent a lot of those underserved areas. Where exactly are the women in these areas supposed to go to get a pap smear or to get a mammogram or many of the other medical provisions that Planned Parenthood affords that they would not have available to them in the rural and medically underserved areas? Where are they to go?
Which is precisely why we increased funding in this bill by $235 million in fiscal year 16 and another $235 million in fiscal year 17 for community health centers. As you know, there are hundreds of Planned Parenthood clinics. There are over 13,000 community health centers across this country, and that's why the increasing resources would be available for those men and women to go to the community health centers and receive the care that they need.
$235 million. And
in addition to the $3.6 billion.
It sounds like a whole lot of money until you start talking about 50 states. And then it's not much at all. And you, Doc, have all of your career helped people. you and any physician, and there are many of you here in Congress that have done things to help people. I understand that. But there are people that don't have doctors and aren't near any physicians. People where physicians may come once a week in certain rural areas of this country. I find it incredible that we would put ourselves in the position of saying to women in this country that a service that has been provided to them is not worthy. And I think it is. And all of the business about Planned Parenthood, you've had state investigations and activities have discredited the allegations regarding all of the things that were being said, even by presidential candidates. 5 states have cleared Planned Parenthood of any wrongdoing. The Energy of Commerce Committee here has investigated the allegations against Planned Parenthood, and they haven't come up with any evidence that there was the problem that is talked about. The fact is, only 1% of Planned Parenthoods, nearly 700 affiliates, are involved in any kind of fetal tissue research. This is the 62nd vote to repeal, defund, or otherwise undermine the Affordable Care Act. When will you hold your first vote on your alternative?
Well, as you and I have had discussions in this committee, as a matter of fact, H.R. 2300, the Empowering Patients First Act, is a bill that I brought forward before Obamacare was introduced, and I look forward to that day when we can bring that bill forward.
But, Doc, you could have brought it today, along with this one. We're going to do something else here in the Rules Committee about scrubbing something, Sunshine for Regulatory Decrees and Settlements Act. We're going to do that. And we could have done this, and we could put it in yet another one of them packages with 3 different measures in a rule. All of the other measures that have been offered, aside from the ones, and I remember very vividly, as a matter of fact, I asked you that question, and you offered to me that there was an alternative. And I don't doubt that, but we aren't voting on it here today. So what are you going to tell the 22 million, nearly 22 million Americans who, at some point, you said not now, will lose their health care as a result of this legislation? Did you think about that?
Absolutely, which is why I'm very excited about the new speaker and the challenge that he's brought to the entire House, and that is to come forward with a replacement piece of legislation this year. And it's important that what I would tell those 22 million people is that we will have a better solution, a patient-centered solution, a solution that puts them in charge of their health care, not Washington, D.C., and allows them to choose the physician that they want to see and the place where they want to be treated, not have it dictated to them by Washington. And I can't tell you how excited I am about the opportunity that's going to come forward.
Well, I'll tell you who are going to be the winners. The winners, no matter what we do, are going to be insurance companies. They've been here and they're going to stay here. And they're going to continue to do the things that they have done. For all the years, coming up on 51 years that I've been a professional, my insurance has gone up every year. Not one did it not go up. And that isn't because of health problems or anything else. Coming up on 80 years, I'm lucky to be here. But the simple fact of the matter is that insurance companies are driving a part of this train. And some of them have acted responsibly. And the thing that is more disturbing to me than anything, and my state is one of the 22 states that didn't expand Medicaid. And there are people right now in the state of Florida, nearly 900,000 of them that are uninsured. Where do they go? You know where they go. They go to the emergency room. And who pays? The taxpayers wind up paying. Every time. I yield back the balance.
Gentleman yields back his time. Thank you very much. The gentleman from Louisville, Texas, Dr. Michael Burgess.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank both of our witnesses for being here. I've already been promised time by Mr. Woodall tomorrow to speak on the floor on this, so I won't go through the entire litany of things that I had. I do remember a time up here in March of 2010 when the Senate bill was brought to the Rules Committee for us to vote on the floor the next day. And I did come to the Rules Committee with 18 what I thought were very valid suggestions for improvement in the Affordable Care Act, and everyone was methodically turned down by a 9-4 vote by the Rules Committee when the Democrats were in control of this committee. I also remember a hearing that was held in September of 2008. It was the same day that Lehman Brothers filed for bankruptcy, so it was kind of one of those days that gets etched into your memory. The hearing that we were having was the crisis in healthcare. The real crisis was outside the hearing room where the economic system was melting down around us, but there we were in the hearing room focused on the cost of healthcare. We had an enormous panel of witnesses. It took almost forever to get through the entire testimony of all of the witnesses. And a question was asked, I can't say it was by me, it was by another member of the subcommittee, who just asked all of these experts assembled in front of us, what is it going to cost to provide, if we say we're going to have nobody in this country uninsured, what is the cost going to be? And there was only one of those 8 or 9 or 10 witnesses who even offered an observation. And his observation was, it depends on what you're going to do. If it's Medicaid, you can probably do that for $60 million a year. If at the time there were presidential candidates who were talking about an FQHC type, a federal employee health benefit plan type of benefit for everyone in the country, and doing the math on that, it was $800 billion a year, $8 trillion over the 10-year budget cycle, since we've got the budget committee here. And that was an astounding difference, $60 billion a year to $800 billion a year. And it's kind of like, well, can you not hit the broadside of a barn here? But the difference was, what benefit are you providing? Well, it turns out, as all of the story with the Affordable Care Act unfolded, we basically got Medicaid, because that was the cost that eventually came through the Senate Help Committee and ultimately the Senate Finance Committee, the cost, because if you'll remember, after the Senate Help Committee came forward with their figures, they said, we're going to cover an additional 12 million people with $1.4 trillion. Everyone went, I think the term is mashugana, and the consequence was that after that, the entire discussion became cost and coverage. It was no longer what are you going to provide, it was cost and coverage, and you had to keep the number under $1 trillion. That was the game. You'll remember this. You had to keep the cost under $1 trillion, and you had to cover 30 million people. And the process was then massaged until they got buy-in by the then Congressional Budget Office to say, aha, the Senate has a bill that covers 30 million people, and it costs just right at $1 trillion. Remember, that was the one that was passed on Christmas Eve, big snowstorm coming to Washington. Everyone wanted to get out of town. And then we got it some 3 months later, and it limped across the House floor without a single Republican vote. But I do remember that hearing in the Energy and Commerce Subcommittee on Health so well, because it was shortly after that there was an editorial published in the Wall Street Journal that talked about a governor in Indiana, Mitch Daniels, who had provided health care to his state employees in a voluntary program. It was called the Healthy Indiana Program. It was basically a high-deductible policy coupled with a health savings account, which the governor would provide to that state employee in total, the total sum of dollars necessary to pay that deductible that year. If none of that money was used, it accrued year over year, and that health savings account would grow. And Governor Daniels found that something magic happened when people spend their own money for health care, even if it wasn't their own money in the first place. So Governor Daniels was able to hold his health care costs down significantly, while every other, whether it was PPO, HMO, Medicaid, Medicare, was going up 7, 8, 9% at the time in calendar year 2008, and he was able to hold his costs down significantly in his state. Why we didn't subpoena Governor Daniels to our subcommittee, chain him to the witness table until he spilled the beans on what his program was, and I think that still today forms the nidus of what would be, I think, a very reasonable program for us to approach. I brought some of those ideas here to the Rules Committee March of 2010, and each one was summarily rejected. I even brought an amendment which would have expanded Medicaid. I took a lot of criticism from people on my side because I created a new mandatory population of the 535 members of the House and Senate and said, we'll put senators and House members on Medicaid. Maybe they'll be more ingenious about finding a way to make this system work rather than just expanding it ad infinitum. I want to ask both of the members here, because they're on the Budget Committee, and I don't really have a head for figures like I should, but we heard a question asked about the cost of Medicare and Medicare overhead, and I think this is an important point that is oftentimes lost in the discussion. Dr. Price, you and I both ran medical practices. We know how stout overhead expenses can be in running a medical practice. Running a hospital, they're probably even steeper. But one of the line items in that overhead cost, one of the line items is the cost of capital. You're going to hire a new doctor, you got to go out and borrow money to do that. And your friendly banker who was allowing you the privilege of borrowing the money will figure in a cost of what that loan is going to be. So in Medicare, how do you all, in the budgetary process, how do you account for the cost of capital when Medicare needs to go out and borrow money?
Well, it's a great point, because the fact of the matter is the statistic of Medicare's administrative costs being 2 or 3% is tossed around. The fact of the matter is that Medicare offloads all of their administration onto the providers of care across this country. So the physicians, the hospitals, the clinics, the ambulatory surgery centers, all of them are performing the administrative duties and absorbing those costs that Medicare forces them to absorb. So it's not 2% that's administrative fees and costs in Medicare. It's comparable, and I suspect it's probably greater than it is in the private sector. But it's virtually impossible to be able to determine that because it's all commingled with the other administrative costs within a medical practice or hospital.
And commingled with the administrative costs in the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Unfortunately, Mr. Cole is no longer here, but he could probably give us some insight into the amount of money that they had to appropriate to Medicare or to HHS simply for the administrative function of administering this very large program. The cost of capital, the cost of borrowing, obviously, for Medicare, they don't borrow money. They just take it from the Treasury.
Take it from Treasury.
And pay it back, maybe, maybe not. But if you and I went and borrowed money, we would have to figure in what is going to be the cost of us re-amortizing that debt over time.
Exactly.
And suffice it to say that at the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, they're not required for that to be a line item. I just have one other set of comments on the Planned Parenthood issue, because Texas did in 2011, as many people will recall, Governor Perry at the time said that Texas was going to exclude providers from their women's health program who provided abortion services. And that was by a state decision. Calendar year 2011, Texas excluded organizations that perform or promote elective abortions in their women's health program. And at the same time, Texas increased funding to community-based clinics. And funding for women's health services for that year, calendar year 2011, were at historically high levels, and that has been maintained. In 2013, the Texas Department of Health and Human Services, in a survey of patient capacity, concluded that in most cases, the state had the capacity to serve even more women in 2013 than it had in 2011, when Planned Parenthood was included as a provider. Community-based clinics expanded their services to offer more robust family planning to improve access. From 2011 to 2013, there was a steady and significant decrease in pregnancies in women 15 to 44 in Texas. So the consequences of this action were not an increase in unintended pregnancies, it was an overall decrease in the number of pregnancies. Comments were made about the demographics of the population served. I do want to point out Planned Parenthood centers and federally qualified health centers are by definition serving different populations. Federally qualified health centers served almost 23 million people in 2014 as compared to 2.7 served by Planned Parenthood centers. In 2014, 31% of FQHC patients were children and 8% were 65 or over, as opposed to a Planned Parenthood center, which basically is providing services to people in the reproductive years. Federally qualified health centers are required, and this is so important, and people forget this. Federally qualified health centers are required to be located in health professional shortage areas, medically underserved areas, or rural areas. Planned Parenthood centers are not subject to those location requirements. Look, we can say a lot of things about both aspects of this reconciliation bill that's coming forward. I'm with the majority of the opinions that have been expressed on this side of the dais. I think this is a reasonable approach. Why is it that the Affordable Care Act has never had, you'd think you're giving stuff away. Why wouldn't it be just astronomically popular? And yet 52, 53, 54% of people are opposed to the Affordable Care Act. To me, the reason is the individual mandate has changed the fundamental nature of the relationship between the government and the governed. And I do still hold on to that romantic notion that we should only have government with the consent of the governed. Now it is being forced upon us. So it is that coercive effect of the Affordable Care Act that in fact provides a corrosive environment that has never allowed the Affordable Care Act to enjoy significant popularity. I welcome the day like you. I look forward to it. I'm optimistic. Like Mr. Woodall, I think the future is bright in the healthcare arena. I thank you for bringing this bill for us today. I'll be happy to support you in getting it to the President's desk. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. Thank you very much. I do not see Mr. Polis here. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Price, thank you for being here. Thanks for your care for a lot of patients, thousands of patients over your time practicing medicine. Thanks to the gentleman from Kentucky for being here. I appreciate your both giving us your time today and your opinions. And I was really struck by something you said earlier, Dr. Price, about the difference between health coverage and health care. We have told millions of Americans that they have coverage, but they're not getting care, and they can't afford care. And when they get care, they're being chased, something I don't remember you saying, being chased by bill collectors the rest of their life because of high deductibles that they didn't used to have. And we have confused coverage with care. And just because you have a piece of paper or a card that says you've got insurance doesn't mean you're going to get care. Right. And it's a real problem that millions of Americans are facing and paying the price for these reforms that aren't working. And I appreciate your willingness to take this head on and try to address it. And I think it's really important. You know, the one question that nobody's asking in healthcare today, at least in traditional insurance-covered treatments, is how much does it cost? Mm-hmm. And so when nobody asks how much it costs, there's never any downward pressure on price, and so price just spirals out of control. Dr. Price, I wonder if you, and you may or may not be familiar with the relative costs of these things, but can you talk about the inflation on insurance-covered treatments versus the cost of elective treatments in the healthcare marketplace, things like cosmetic surgery that are not covered, things like LASIK that are not covered, where the individual actually shops on things like price as one of price and quality as their data points for making decisions. Are you familiar with
Sure.
the price trends in those two different categories?
Yeah, it's a great point because the areas where there is no control of prices and where the government's not involved, in fact, there is downward pressure, and we've seen a huge decrease in the cost of those procedures themselves, whether it's cosmetic surgery or whether it's ophthalmologic surgery, LASIK surgery. And so there's evidence all across the spectrum. If you have a market, if you have a situation where individuals are actually able to select the kind of coverage, the kind of care, the individual that's caring for them, then there is much greater cost control.
So it goes back to allocation of resources, and you know what Republicans have said all along is a free market system encourages innovation and efficiencies that will ultimately reduce price and increase quality. Dr. Price, do you think that would work in healthcare too?
I have no doubt about it. And one of the things that's lost in all of this is the incredible importance of innovation. When you have a system that incentivizes innovation and incentivizes higher quality and incentivizes greater efficiency and incentivizes the kinds of decisions that reward those things, you get them. When you have a system that's controlled by the federal government and which is glacial in its ability to move on anything, witness the fact that the previous majority party has been loath to even consider responsible, common sense changes to this law. What happens is that you don't get them, and consequently you don't get the highest quality and you don't get innovation. I am reminded from my colleagues all of the time in the area of orthopedics, the area that I practice, the other nations and other areas of the world that they now go to see what is cutting edge, because the technology in this country is losing to other countries because of the force of the federal government that is disincentivizing innovation and higher quality.
And you've been a physician for how many years, Dr. Price?
Oh, 36.
So in your 30 years as a physician, Medicare and Medicaid, the government programs, how do they compensate physicians? On what basis?
Well, it's a great question as well, because it's hard to tell how they
basically
compensate.
it's fee-for-service kind of, right?
And it's a cost control. It's a dictated price to the individuals providing the care.
So, and this is probably a little controversial to talk about, but even inside our government programs, you know, Mr. Yarmouth said he thought Medicare worked great, but shouldn't we change the way we compensate physicians a little bit to pay them for outcomes as opposed to procedures? Because in my opinion, you get what you pay for. If you pay for more procedures, you'll get more procedures over time. If we can shift the model a little bit to give physicians a bonus payment for outcomes, won't we get better outcomes?
Well, you may. The jury's still out on that. I would suggest that they're not mutually exclusive. And that
I agree. We probably have to find
and if you allow for the
between
kind
the
of
two.
flexibility that exists and the kind of innovation in the payment system as well, in the payment models, and what's right for one patient from a payment model may not be what's right for another patient.
And aren't we seeing private insurance companies move to some payments for quality over time?
Yeah, absolutely.
And has the federal government followed that trend?
Well, they followed it in a way that is more dictatorial as opposed to expansive and flexible and innovative. And consequently, I'm certain that they will not get to the right position.
Does that kill innovation?
Sure it does. Kills innovation, kills choices, kills affordability, kills quality. All the things that the American people want in healthcare are being harmed by the federal government's intervention.
Can I just make 2
You
points,
certainly
Mr.
may.
Savage?
I'd like to hear your perspective.
Thank you very much. One is, I want to agree with you about the question of consumer concern about costs. Years ago, before I was in politics, I was working for a healthcare company, spoke to the Downtown Rotary Club in Louisville, 600 people there, and I asked them, how many of you have ever asked what a medical procedure cost? 3 hands went up out of 600. So I mean, I think that is definitely a factor. Of course, the problem with that is, when you're talking about cosmetic surgery or LASIK or whatever it is, you're talking about voluntary procedures. You're not talking about when you're sick or injured, where the supply and demand equation changes. And you're a lot less concerned about cost when you're sick or injured. The other thing is, in Medicare, the Affordable Care Act sets a number of things in play in terms of Medicare reform to change the compensation system to reward performance, both in institutions, hospitals, and so forth, and providers. And fortunately, this bill would not change that. I think part of it recognizes that the Medicare reforms that were put in place, the Affordable Care Act, have been successful because, and the jury's still out, as you said, about exactly what the cause and effect is. But the fact is that Medicare prices Medicare's budget our costs were inflating at about 7% a year before the Affordable Care Act went into place. Now it's down to about 3% a year. So under the Affordable Care Act, the rise in costs in Medicare the growth has improved dramatically. Now, whether that's all because of Affordable Care Act or partially because of it, but the coincidence is there.
Mr. Yarmouth, are you familiar with the way that Obamacare treats hospital-owned physician practices?
I was
Do you
involved.
realize they get paid under Obamacare a higher reimbursement rate than the physician-owned practice did before they were bought by a hospital.
Oh, yes, I am.
And do you
And
realize
it's-
that that is increasing the acceleration with which hospitals are buying physician practices?
Yes.
And not only increasing the cost, but also changing who controls the referral process, and those hospital-owned physician practices are strongly encouraged, I'll use with air quotes, to refer inside their own hospital and controlling. So it's not only driving up cost, it's taking away patients' free choice. It is, I believe, I have good friends in the hospital industry. This is not their doing. The government made these choices to reimburse hospital-owned physician practices at a higher rate. It is fundamentally changing the relationship between the patient and the doctor. It is raising costs. It is, it's another one of the things I am definitely scared about the future of our healthcare system because of what happens to referrals. When a hospital-owned physician practice, which is encouraged under the payment system to be bought by the hospital, controls the referral, do you ever think they're going to send you to the best quality care, or are they going to send you to the care they happen to own under their same umbrella? That's the problem with total control in one place, and that's one of my concerns and why I like Dr. Price's alternative. So it's, I'm really concerned about that much power in one place, and we the government, we the people, have allowed that to happen by paying hospitals more when they own a physician practice. It's terrible.
Yep, absolutely.
I agree with you.
So, I didn't mean to go off on that rant, and my friends I'm sure I'll get lots of calls from my friends in the hospital industry now, but I just think it's bad policy, and I know we've got to fix that too, and we've got a lot of work ahead of us, and I hope we can all come together on some reforms to fix our healthcare system overall, and it's too bad that this has to be so contentious, because frankly, there's good ideas all around, although, it sounds like everybody on that side of the aisle is essentially saying we need to move to the single-payer system, which causes me great concern, because again, it's even more power in one place. And in the places that have a single-payer system, Canada just to our north, people die waiting in line, and they create a queuing system.
Right.
And instead of giving everybody care and innovation, they create a line, and if you wait too long in line that you happen to pass away, that just is part of the way the system works in Europe and in Canada.
Yep.
And that's why so many people come to the Cleveland Clinic in Ohio, in my home state, and go to all these other great hospitals in America from all around the world, because we have the best health care in the world. Yep. We just need to make sure we get it to our people. And I want to go back where I started, which is with Dr. Price. We should not confuse coverage with care. We need to get people good health care, and coverage, saying you've got a card that says you've got health insurance, even though your deductible's $15,000 that you don't have anymore, is a problem. And I just have one more question for Mr. Yarmouth. You talked about the individual mandate and how great it was, and it was saving everybody because now the people can't just get sick and get care. Help me through this, because I believe somebody could pay the penalty of $900 a year until they get sick and then take the coverage. Couldn't they still do that?
They could still do that. I didn't say the individual mandate was a great thing. I said that the guaranteed issue provision, which again eliminates discrimination because of medical history, does not work unless there is a pre-existing condition. I mean, an individual mandate. Otherwise, people wait until they get sick and buy coverage.
So if coverage costs $6,000 a year and a penalty is $900 a year, is there still an incentive to maybe not get coverage until you get sick, Mr. Yarmouth?
Well, actually, the penalty this year is going up from that, depending on what your income level is. I think it's $1,600 this year. But
Okay, $1,600 versus $6,000. Is there still an incentive to wait and get coverage when you get sick?
There could be. There could be.
So,
Yeah.
that's, it seems to me that we haven't really solved that problem with the way this system works. And what I'd rather do is make sure we make health care affordable for everyone through innovation and competition, and then more people will actually opt in, because we have 30 million people who've chosen not to take this system, and that's too many. Thank you. I took too long, but thank you both for your time. I appreciate your willingness to answer our questions, and thank you for being here at the Rules Committee.
Thanks.
Mr. Polis? No questions.
Thank you.
Mr. Byrne?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Chairman, I wasn't here when the law was passed, but it's my understanding that at the time the ACA was passed, 80% of Americans either had health insurance, Medicare, or Medicaid. Is that right?
That's in the ballpark, 80 to 85.
And I think I heard the other day that as of the most recent sign-up, that 5% of the people in America have now gotten insurance or Medicaid that didn't have it before as a result of the law. Is that about right?
Yeah, yes, but it's tough. It's tough to compare those figures because, for example, those of us on the Federal Employee Health Benefits Program are now on Obamacare. We were forced to be on Obamacare, and they use those numbers to inflate the number of folks that have gotten coverage.
Well, let's give it 5%.
That's fair.
5%. So we know that we changed the law that affects the health care for 85% of the people in America to help 5% of the people of America. Now, the reason it's not the other complete uninsured people is that we know from a recent New York Times article that a lot of the people that should be signing up have elected not to sign up and said, we're going to pay the penalty because the penalty cost me less than paying the premiums and my deductible. Have you heard that as well?
Absolutely. That's the financial incentive not to be covered.
So the majority of the people that this should have been aimed at are electing to pay the penalty rather than get the insurance. So we're not going to even reach a majority of the uninsured people because they choose not to be insured.
And I think that's accurate, and I think that's one of the reasons that we could look toward more positive solutions that would actually provide a financial incentive for folks to gain coverage as opposed to a disincentive.
Well, I want to agree with something Ms. Slaughter said because I wrote it down because I thought it was so right. She said, I don't understand the great zeal to take health care away from people. And I agree with you. I don't understand that either. I remember the president said when this law was being considered and afterwards, if you like your health insurance plan, you can keep it. And that turned out not to be true. And he said it over and over and over again. And I spent my Christmas holidays, because we got back kind of late, and I'm tardy doing my shopping. I was out shopping a lot. There were a lot of people shopping at the last minute. I heard from those people that lost their health insurance. They lost their health care because of this law. And I agree with Ms. Slaughter. I don't understand the zeal for a law that took health care away from my constituents. I don't understand that. So if we have an opportunity to go back and try to fix this, not just for the 85%, although it'd be worth it just to fix it for them, but for everybody in America, we come up with a common sense health care plan that helps everybody, that gets something to where we're in control and not some bureaucracy in Washington. Frankly, one of the most difficult bureaucracies I've ever dealt with in my life. What is this thing, CMS, MMS? The most difficult group of people I've had to deal with for my constituents. Why would we empower them instead of empowering our constituents to make their own decisions without us telling them what kind of health insurance you have to have, what kind of coverage you got to have, all these other things, telling doctors how to provide health care to us. You knew a good friend of mine, Chairman Sessions knew a good friend of mine, unfortunately died recently, Jeff Terry, was a urologist from my district, who took Medicaid patients as a urologist, even though he lost money on them, because he knew without him there would be no urology care for people in my district who were Medicaid eligible. And yet when he tried to come up here and get some relief from some of these onerous regulations from the bureaucracy up here, he was pushed back. He was told no. So somebody that's trying to help has been told no by the bureaucracy that's supposed to be there to help us. Could you explain that to me? I don't understand how that's helping doctors or patients.
No, it isn't. And you mentioned Jeff Terry, who's a physician who had an untimely death last fall, who I don't know anybody who has been more passionate about providing care for his patients. And he would volunteer and donate his time to come to Washington to try to help CMS get it right, and was just rebuffed time after time after time after time. But a greater champion for patients I haven't met.
Well, thank you for that. And I got to meet with his family before Christmas and give them a little gift from those of us that knew and loved Jeff Roy did up here. I just want to say one final thing. I heard from Mr. McGovern that this building is going nowhere. This bill is going to the desk of the President of the United States, and never in all these other attempts has a bill gone to the desk of the President of the United States. The President has the opportunity to do the right thing, and he hadn't had that opportunity since the law was passed. He can do the right thing. Sign this bill. Give us all an opportunity to work together as Democrats and Republicans and doctors and patients and insurance companies and everybody. Come up with something that works for the American people. So I am pleased that you did this. I thank you for doing this.
Could the gentleman yield just one
And,
second?
when I'm finished,
Okay,
I'll be
yeah,
happy to
sure.
yield to you. But at this point in time, I want to make sure that we're all aware that this bill is going somewhere. It's going to the desk of the President of the United States, and none of these bills have gone there before, and it's time for the President to do the right thing. I'll be happy to yield
No,
some time.
I was just
my-
going to say to the gentleman that the President will veto the bill, but if that satisfies your base, fine. But we've been here now for 2 hours talking about a bill that's going to be vetoed, and I think that, there are other people waiting. And I'm not saying that you talk too long. I'm just simply saying that this has kind of gone on for a long time, and this is the 62nd time we've had this debate. And so if that's going someplace and makes everybody happy, then fine, terrific, it's going someplace. And it's not going to become law, and I'm happy about that. I know you're not, but...
I reclaim my time. I understand what the gentleman is saying, but he said it's going nowhere, and it is going somewhere. It may not be going far enough, but it's going somewhere. And the American people get to see this. And the American people, and we know by all the polls, do not like this law. And they get to decide, do I want somebody that's going to continue with this failed law that took my health care plan away from me, or I'm going to go with somebody that's going to go somewhere different? And I'm glad that we're giving them that choice, and I'm confident of what the outcome's going to be. And Madam Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Washington is recognized.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. One of the advantages in sitting in the end seat here is you can listen to what everybody says, and many of the things that have been said today that I agree with, some I don't, but you don't have to listen a lot to me because a lot of things what I was going to say have already been said. But I do think that this is an important debate to have. I think the people that elected us are glad we're having this debate. They want us to have this debate. This is one of the biggest issues that I hear about in my district, and I'm sure that's true in many of your districts as well. A concern of people that, in my district especially, that certainly I agree with Dr. Cole. There are some people that are better off now than they were before this law was passed, but there are a good number of people that are not. Their costs have gone up, insurance premiums have gone up, costs of health care continue to go up. Their choices are fewer than what they were before. And this is certainly not the solution to the health care situation we have in this country. And I applaud the efforts that I think we're taking here and the important step that we're taking to move us a step closer to giving the people in this country what they want in a patient-centered kind of a healthcare system. So this is an important step. It is going somewhere. It is taking us down the road of getting to a place where we want to be. As far as the other provision in this legislation that has to do with the Planned Parenthood provisions and funding, a lot's been said about that, and certainly I think that this is a very important issue to people back home as well. I just had one question about that, and like I said, I'll keep my comments brief. But we are increasing the amount of money going to community health centers to be able to make up the difference for what may be an impact to the clinics that are not going to be funded. So the question that comes to mind is, and out of it has to do with capacity. Could you tell me a little bit, either one of you, about the ability of these community health centers to take up the slack, so to speak, or fill whatever gap or void that might be created if we reduce the funding to?
Well, I appreciate the question. It's an important point because we bent over backwards to make certain that the resources were there and available to be able to provide a greater level of service than is currently being provided. As I mentioned, extra $235 million in both fiscal year 16 and fiscal year 17 for the community health centers. That's on top of, and this is ballpark, but that's on top of about $3.6 billion to provide for services in the community health centers. And again, ballpark figures, but instead of about 500 clinics that Planned Parenthood has around the country, it's about 13,000 is my recollection in the community health centers. So, and as I think Mr. Woodall or Dr. Burgess pointed out, those community health centers are by definition in the areas that are lower served and have to be in those areas, so the rural areas and the areas where greater needs may exist. So we've strived to make certain that there was a higher level of resources available for care for women, especially in the community health centers, and this bill would address that.
If I may comment on that, in my district, which is Louisville, Kentucky, a heavily urbanized area, we have 3 major public health centers, community health centers. They've all said there's no way they could accommodate the 5,000 people a year additional who would now get services through Planned Parenthood. The other issue, so I think it's going to vary from region to region and area and place to place. The other issue is that many of the community health centers do not have OBGYN specialists on staff or capabilities. So just saying that they can go to a community health center, if they're looking for OBGYN services, they're not necessarily going to get them.
But with the increased funding, it does help build the infrastructure necessary to do that. And like the example Dr. Burgess pointed out in Texas, it sounded like that the amount of health care provided was actually increased over time. So that was a concern of mine that I wanted to make clear. So thank you very much for that. And again, I appreciate you guys being here, bringing this important topic up. And just to start off 2016 on a good note, I want to thank everybody for the wonderful Christmas cards that we received from each of you. So look forward to a very productive 2016. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back my time.
Thank you very much. Gentleman yields back his time. Mr. Polis, did you have an opportunity to participate? Thank you very much. I went down to vote. Is there any other member that seeks time from this panel? I want to thank both of you for taking time. We've called the floor and asked them to please hold on for a couple more minutes. You'll find that you need to hustle. Thank you very much. I appreciate your help. This closes the hearing portion of on the Senate Amendment H.R. 3671. I would now like to call up H.R. 712, Sunshine for Regulatory Decrees and Settlement Act of 2015, and would welcome a panel that would include the gentleman, the chairman of the Committee on Government Oversight and Reform, Mr. Chaffetz, the gentleman from Judiciary, Mr. Marino, the gentleman, Mr. Johnson from Georgia, and the gentleman, Mr. Conley from Virginia, as they are here or would be joining us. And thank you very much. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Is there any other member that would wish to be heard on this matter? Seeing none at this time, we will proceed accordingly. Anything you have in writing will be entered the record. Without objection, we're going to do that. We've already, before you were here, we've given our opening statements. We're delighted that you're here. We would defer to the gentleman, chairman of the committee, Mr. Chaffetz, for any statement on this that he would choose. Gentleman's recognized.
I thank the chairman and I thank the Rules Committee for this consideration and the opportunity to speak in favor of H.R. 712, the Sunshine for Regulatory Decrees and Settlements Act of 2015. The past several years have seen that we've witnessed a surge in the number of new regulations dramatically impacting the lives of everyday Americans. The H.R. 712 includes H.R. 1759, the All Economic Regulations Are Transparent Act, or the ALERT Act, as authored by Congressman John Radcliffe. The Committee on Oversight and Government Reform favorably reported the ALERT Act on May 29th of 2015. It's a simple transparency bill, requires administration to provide meaningful information about upcoming regulations before the regulations go into effect. On a monthly basis, as opposed to the way the current structure is, on a monthly basis, agencies would be required to list all the regulations expected to be proposed or finalized within the final year. It seems like an open suggestion that was offered by Mr. Radcliffe. It makes immense sense to us. It requires that each regulation list the objective of the regulation, the legal basis of the regulation, and the current stage in the rulemaking process. If the agency expects to finalize the regulation within the following year, the agency is also required to provide information such as cost, completion date, and the economic effects. And to make sure that agencies are making a good faith effort to provide the information, the Act prohibits regulations from going into effect until they have been listed on the monthly reports no less than 6 months prior to the notification. In rare cases, when the President determines the rule is necessary for national security, enforcement of criminal laws, protecting health and safety, or compliance with international trade agreements, a 6-month requirement can be waived, but I would hope that would be few and far between. By the administration's own estimates, federal regulations promulgated over the last 10 years alone have imposed a cost of more than $100 billion a year annually. We're simply trying to offer transparency, and I think that's why it saw favorable support within the committee, and we urge its adoption. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to answer questions and yield back.
Thank you very much. I'd now like to go to your counterpart, the gentleman, Mr. Conley, who is here representing government reform. The gentleman, Mr. Conley, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr.
Yes,
Chairman. And Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Slaughter and members of the Rules Committee, Happy New Year.
Thank you.
And I appreciate the opportunity to testify on behalf of the Oversight Committee minority. I think we can all agree that the purported goal of H.R. 1155, the Scrub Act, agencies should eliminate duplicative and outdated rules. However, they're already required to do so under a series of executive orders issued by the President. Executive order, we're in 712. Do you want me to finish this too, or just go to 712?
This is your time to come up
All right.
and talk with us. I
I'm
recognize
talking
we've
about
got
these
several.
Thank you.
That's correct, sir.
I'm talking about these two bills.
Yes, sir.
Executive Order 13563, issued in January 11, 2011, requires agencies to develop plans for reviewing existing rules and requires agencies to engage in periodic review of existing significant regulations. Executive Order 13610, issued by the President on May 10, 2012, requires agencies to institutionalize regular assessment of significant regulations to promote public participation in retrospective review and to report twice a year to the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, also known as OIRA, on their progress. In addition, Congress has been engaged in an almost obsessive oversight of agency rules, such as the EPA's Clean Power Plan and rules promulgated under the Affordable Care Act, as the majority exercises congressional authority to conduct oversight of agency regulatory activities. The Scrub Act would authorize $30 million to establish a 9-member commission made up of unelected officials to perform a function agencies and Congress already can and should be providing. This delegation of authority is almost unprecedented. This commission would wield enormous authority. For example, the commission would have virtually unlimited subpoena power, including the ability to compel witness testimony as well as document production. Most agency inspectors general do not even have the ability to compel witnesses to testify, yet this bill would provide such an extraordinary delegation of authority to a commission solely focused on rulemaking. The Scrub Act would abdicate congressional authority to this unelected commission and then impose a regulatory cut-go scheme in which agencies would have to propose eliminating an existing regulation before promulgating a new one. That forces agencies into an arbitrary position of choosing between preserving existing public and health safety protections or responding to new situations and threats, actually potentially jeopardizing the very public health and safety that is their mission. This bill provides no safe harbor exceptions for rules, no matter how important. Title IV also opens up agency compliance to endless court challenges by applying judicial review. I would note that Oversight Committee Ranking Member Elijah Cummings and myself submitted an amendment to the committee's consideration to strike that title. We also submitted an amendment to exempt independent agencies. The bill, as currently drafted, would require independent agencies such as the SEC or the CFPB to obtain approval from OIRA on the accuracy of their regulatory cost calculations. These agencies are currently not required to submit rules for such reviews, as it would threaten their independence, perhaps the real object of the provision itself. I'd also like to briefly address H.R. 712. Specifically Title II, which includes the text of the All Economic Regulations of Transparent Act. Agencies are already required to provide status updates twice a year on their plans for proposing and finalizing rules pursuant to the Regulatory Flexibility Act and Executive Order 12866. This legislation would require agencies to report not twice a year, but monthly. The most egregious provision in Title II would prohibit agency rules from taking effect until OIRA has posted certain information online for at least 6 months. This moratorium can only be avoided if the agency claims an exception from the notice and comment requirements of the Administrative Procedure Act, or if the President issues an executive order. Under this bill, an agency would post information about the cost of a proposed rule for a year. But if OIRA doesn't post that information for at least 6 months, the agency would be prohibited from moving forward. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Cummings and I submitted an amendment to the committee for consideration that would strike the 6-month moratorium. Striking that provision would keep important agency rules from being needlessly delayed, but delays ad infinitum also seem to be the objective here. We also submitted an amendment that would exempt independent agencies from the requirements of Title II. I would ask the amendments offered by Ranking Member Cummings and myself, along with the amendment offered by Representative Stephen Lynch, that would require agencies to consider the benefits of regulations as well as the costs, be made in order. And I thank the committee for its attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Connolly. We're glad that you're here, and your suggestions for the committee's product is welcome, and I thank you very much. I'd next like to go to Mr. Moreno, the subcommittee chair on regulatory reform, commercial and antitrust law, and the gentleman is now recognized, Mr. Moreno.
Thank you, Chairman Sessions and Ranking Member Ms. Slaughter, for giving me the opportunity to testify today regarding H.R. 712. I'm going to address that bill first, and then when we get through with that, if you have no objections, I can go to the next bill.
Certainly.
So you don't have to listen to me speak for 15 minutes straight. You get a break between that. This is the Sunshine for Regulation and Regulatory Decrees and Settlement Act of 2016. H.R. 712 was introduced in its original form by Mr. Collins of Georgia. The Judiciary Committee ordered H.R. 712 favorably reported on March 24 of 2015. The Rules Committee print of H.R. 712 also includes 2 other pieces of regulatory reform legislation reported favorably by the Judiciary Committee. Title II of the bill includes the, quote, ALERT Act, unquote, introduced as H.R. 1759 by Mr. Radcliffe of Texas and ordered to be reported on April 15, 2015. Title III of the bill includes the, quote, Providing Accountability Through Transparency Act, end quote, introduced as H.R. 690 by Mr. Luckenmeyer of Missouri and ordered to be reported on the same day as H.R. 712. Mr. Chairman, the need for this legislation to help create jobs and achieve full economic recovery is clear. Despite claims that the Great Recession has ended, small business owners and Main Street families across our nation know the truth. America is still struggling to create enough new jobs and economic growth to produce the prosperity Americans need and deserve. To resolve this situation, Congress must stay focused on enacting reforms that will stop the losses. Regulatory reform is essential to this effort. Federal regulations already imposes nearly $2 trillion in annual cost on our economy. Under that burden, America's job creators and innovators simply cannot create the jobs and growth needed to produce a better future for Americans. Today's bill contains measures that will help remedy the situation. Title I, the Sunshine for Regulatory Decrees and Settlement Act, offers strong reforms to attack the problem of sue and settle regulations that lies behind many of the costliest new regulations issued by Washington each year. Time and again, new high-cost regulations are issued under consent decrees and settlement agreements that force federal agencies to issue new rules. In this fashion, an agency wanting to enact new regulations strikes a deal with pro-regulation plaintiffs. The deal leads to a lawsuit from the plaintiffs, and the ultimate result is a settlement that carries the force of law and results in new oppressive regulations. These discussions occur in secret. Regulated entities, our nation's job creators, often do not know about these deals until court documents become public, but then it's too late. Title I brings this abusive practice to an end. Title II, the Alert Act, rests on the same principle of transparency. Even when new regulations are not forced upon them by judicial decree, Americans deserve to know what new regulations agencies plan to send their way. They deserve to know earlier and more clearly what those new rules will look like, how much they will cost, and when they may be imposed. Current law requires the executive branch to disclose some of this information on a semi-annual or annual basis. But the Obama administration has gamed and abused this process by regularly delaying disclosures and denying information. The Alert Act therefore reforms disclosure requirements for upcoming rules by requiring more details to be disclosed. It also requires the publication of monthly online updates of information on the rules, schedules, cost, and economic effects, including jobs impacts. Finally, Title III of the bill helps to fix one of the most maddening things confronted by Main Street Americans and small business owners. Not only do federal regulators issue too many regulations that cost too much, too often those regulations are impossible for an ordinary citizen to understand. Title III offers a welcome remedy by requiring each agency to publish an online 100-word plain language summary of any new proposed regulation. The provisions in this bill are sure to help Americans who are besieged and bewildered by the daily flood of new regulations flowing from Washington's regulatory bureaucracy. I thank Representative Collins, Radcliffe, and Lukemeyer for introducing each piece of legislation the bill contains. And I request that the Rules Committee grant an appropriate rule that allows for expeditious consideration of H.R. 427. Thank you, and I yield back.
Mr. Marino, thank you very much. Very succinct, and I appreciate it very much, you taking your time to wait the number of hours that you have this afternoon. I want to thank that gentleman. Mr. Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and it's great to be back with you. Happy New Year to everyone. I speak in opposition to H.R. 712, the Sunshine for Regulatory Decrees and Settlements Act of 2015, but rather than bringing sunshine into the rulemaking process, what this does is throw dark side of the moon shade on the process. In fact, the Sunshine for Regulatory Decrees and Settlements Act turns the lights out on regulations in place to protect the health, safety, and well-being of the people. This misnomered legislation should be renamed the Lights Out for Consent Decrees and Settlements Act of 2015. Title I of H.R. 712 imposes numerous burdensome procedural requirements on agencies and courts that are designed to hamstring and outright discourage the use of consent decrees and settlements that ensure the enforcement of the law. Proponents of this provision argue that it is necessary because federal agencies collude with pro-regulatory plaintiffs to advance a mutually agreed-upon regulatory agenda through the use of consent decrees and settlement agreements. But according to I'll say according to my Republican colleagues, this so-called sue and settle litigation specifically allows agencies to skirt the requirements of the Administrative Procedure Act to dictate the contents of an agency rulemaking or bind agency action. Simply put, the majority has not put forth a shred of credible evidence to support this claim. To the contrary, consent decrees and settlement agreements are an important tool to ensuring the timely compliance with statutory deadlines established by Congress to protect the environment and the public's health and safety. In fact, the Government Accountability Office, GAO, reported in December 2014 that there is zero evidence indicating that agencies collude with public interest groups in bringing these consent decrees, as the majority has often claimed. In its report, the GAO referred to these lawsuits as deadline suits because they simply compel agencies to take statutorily required actions within a designated time frame. The GAO also found little evidence that deadline suits determine the substantive outcome of agency action because agency officials, quote, stated that they have not and would not agree to settlements in a deadline suit that finalize the substantive outcome of the rulemaking or declare the substance of the final rule, end quote. Earlier this year, Amit Narang, a regulatory policy advocate for Public Citizen, also clarified during the legislative hearing on H.R. 712 that, quote, all of the settlements scrutinized by GAO pursuant to the EPA's rulemaking authority under the Clean Air Act went through the public notice and comment process, allowing all members of the public an opportunity to comment on the rule before it is finalized, end quote. This finding confirms that there is little evidence supporting the proposition that federal agencies engage in backroom deals with pro-regulatory groups to circumvent the APA or substantively bind the agency in a subsequent rulemaking. In the absence of actual evidence of collusion between federal agencies and plaintiffs, H.R. 712 addresses a non-existent problem through a series of requirements designed to undermine the rule of law by preventing the enforcement of statutes passed by Congress to protect the public, to slow down agency action, and bust the door wide open to almost anyone who wants to impede agency action by intervening in these actions. For example, H.R. 712 would allow for nearly any private party to intervene in a consent decree, revealing the legislation's true purpose of stacking the deck in industry's favor to avoid the enforcement of the law. This intervention right is drafted so broadly that if the regulatory action at issue involved the Clean Water Act, in theory, any person who uses water would have the right to intervene in the negotiations on a potential consent decree or settlement agreement. Certainly, any industry interest would not hesitate to intervene. Title II of H.R. 712 imposes a 6-month moratorium on all rules ranging from the mundane but necessary rules such as numerous U.S. Coast Guard bridges closing regulations to rules that ensure our health and safety. The only reason for this unprecedented delay in agency rulemaking, the so-called diminishing transparency of the regulatory process. Some of my Republican colleagues have argued that regulatory transparency, which is important to public participation in the rulemaking process, requires timely notice of proposed rules, and yet Notwithstanding this claim by Republicans, millions of Americans have recently commented on a single proposed rulemaking, representing the largest public response to any request for public comment in a federal rulemaking in the history of this nation. This extensive activity in the past year alone hardly suggests an agency process shrouded in secrecy and in need of reform. In addition to this moratorium, this provision would saddle every federal agency, including independent agencies that are primarily independent because they aren't subject to the centralized review of rulemaking by the White House through the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, with a number of analytical reporting requirements that duplicate existing transparency requirements built into the rulemaking process. This reporting requirement would drown these agencies and waste taxpayer dollars every month. These requirements would apply to every rule within the Administrative Procedure Act, about 6,000 rules per year, many of which simply involve bridge openings and closings by the Coast Guard. In addition to wasting agency resources and, by extension, taxpayer dollars, this bill would have the ironic and unintended consequence of decreasing regulatory transparency. These reporting requirements would inundate the public with monthly waves of data that would be largely useless and undermine the public's ability to identify regulations that actually matter in public debate. Furthermore, this arbitrary regulatory delay would also have the effect of undermining transparency in the regulatory process by specifically prohibiting the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs from taking into account the benefits of rules when providing total cost estimates for proposed and final rules. Thus, a regulation that costs only $1 but results in $1 billion in benefits would only be reported as costing $1. So much for the short title of the bill, the so-called Sunshine Act. Finally, Title III of H.R. 712 would require a notice of proposed rulemaking that is published in the Federal Register to include an internet link to a plain language 100-word summary of the rule. While I am sympathetic to that goal of making rulemaking more easily understandable, I have several concerns with this bill as just feel-good legislation that does little to improve the rulemaking process. First, the Code of Federal Regulations already requires agencies to include short, comprehensible summaries as part of a notice of proposed rulemaking. Additionally, Section 553 of the APA outlines a series of requirements for rules requiring notice and comment to explain the substance of the proposed rule and the issues involved, in addition to other requirements. Second, I have concerns that although this summary requirement may be benign on its face, it could form the basis for vacating a rule under Section 706 of the APA. There is no generally accepted definition of the term plain language, which would require courts to determine whether a summary was adequately plain. I plan to offer an amendment to address this concern. And finally, many administrative law experts have repeatedly called on Congress to avoid legislating additional requirements in the rulemaking process, which is already ossified, slow, and inflexible in responding to public health and safety threats. As I noted earlier, this legislation is potentially duplicative of existing law and does little to address the overarching concerns with rulemaking. In closing, I strongly oppose this legislation and urge my colleagues to do the same. And before I close, however, I would ask that this statement and amendment of my colleague Sheila Jackson Lee, who could not be here tonight to testify personally, be made a part of this record.
We'll enter that into the record. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much. I assume all four members have had an opportunity to address the committee on their concerns that they came here for. Thank you very much. Rarely do I find that any piece of legislation nails exactly everything the way it should be done off everybody's evaluation. What I will say is that this is being presented to the Rules Committee because, as an example, President Obama's first 5 years in office, the annual regulatory burden on Americans has increased by nearly $73 billion, with a total of 157 new major regulations being imposed. And I think it's awesome to have people run for president, and I think it's great to have people come up with new and great ideas. But I think there has to be some sort of a process that is imposed. And I think that what has been talked about today could have some unintended consequences, perhaps. But I would say that I think that what we're trying to do here has to put an end to this $73 billion in 6 years of 157 new major projects, regulations on the American people. I think that one group of unelected bureaucrats should not put off on the American people something without being held accountable. Thank you very much. Mrs. Fox?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your comments about this legislation being right on target, but I know you meant to say that it would be really, really great legislation if it included my amendments.
Well, I will revise and extend my remarks accordingly.
So I'm going to use my brief time to mention my amendments, if you don't mind, and try to speed the process up just a little bit. I am very much in favor of these two pieces of legislation, and I do want to say that my amendment to Title II of H.R. 712, the ALERT Act, would require agencies to include in their monthly report to OIRA whether rules in the pipeline impose unfunded mandates on state or local governments or on the private sector. In 1995, the Congress passed with strong bipartisan support the unfunded mandates bill, but the bureaucrats you talked about have found many ways to get around those. That also requires OIRA to include in its annual cumulative assessment of new regulations the total cost of unfunded mandates. And as you point out, the cost of the regulations coming out of not just this president, but certainly they're really egregious under this president, but of any administration, is burdensome, but particularly burdensome when we put them on when state and local governments and even on the private sector. So I want to say I support this legislation very much, and I hope that the committee will support my two amendments. And with that, I would yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Slaughter?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I ask unanimous consent to put the statement of administrative policy for both these bills into the record, and yield back my time.
Thank you very much. Gentlewoman yields back. The gentleman, does any Republican seek time? Does any Democrat seek time? Let me look at all four of you and tell you you've done an excellent job. You've given us today a presentation of an understanding of important activities that go on that impact America, that impacts our judicial system, and that you've brought forth good arguments, I believe, on both sides of that. The Rules Committee, as you know, handles legislation where we're here for hours and hours, and you've caught us at the end of a few of those hours, and I appreciate all four of you being succinct and to the point about what you've done. If you'll please remember that we have our top stenographer here, and that for her to properly prepare the reports that are necessary, she would love to have you leave anything that you brought in writing for her to complete that task. I want to thank all four of you for your time. I know that a good number of you hung out for a lot of time this afternoon, and I want to welcome you back, and we appreciate you taking time to be with us today. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, sir. Mr. Marino? We're going to put that all together. Did you give your testimony that you chose? I thought I had asked if.
I don't think we did not, but I would be glad to submit it for the record so we can.
That
cut
would
this
be
short.
awesome. That would be awesome.
Hank, you agree?
Yes.
Everybody agree?
Great.
Yes, he's
Yes.
spoken to it.
I knew some of you did. That's why I asked, did everyone give the full presentation that they would choose to give?
Thank you.
You very much. We
Thank you, Mr.
appreciate
Chairman, for
you
your
being here.
time.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you very much. This now, is there any other member that would wish to seek recognition to be heard on an amendment or any other piece of business related to these provisions that we have spoken about, H.R. 712 and H.R. 1155? Seeing none, the hearing portion of this is now closed, and the chairman would be in receipt of a motion from the gentlewoman from Grandfather Community, North Carolina, the vice chairman of the committee, Dr. Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move the committee grant a rule providing for the consideration of the Senate amendment to H.R. 3762, the Restoring Americans Healthcare Freedom Reconciliation Act of 2015. The rule makes an order a motion offered by the chair of the Committee on the Budget or his designee that the House concur in the Senate amendments to H.R. 3762. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the motion. The rule provides that the Senate amendment and the motion shall be considered as read. The rule provides 1 hour debate on the motion, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on the Budget or their respective designees. Section 2 of the rule provides that Section 3B1 of House Resolution 5 is amended by striking, quote, "the first session of," end quote.
You've now heard the motion from the gentlewoman from North Carolina in her motion on the Senate amendment to H.R. 3762, what is known as reconciliation. Is there amendment or discussion to that?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I would like to be heard on the provision.
Gentlewoman's recognized.
In the provision of the resolution that renews the staff deposition authority for a handful of House committees. I ask unanimous consent to insert in the record 2 letters. One is a letter from Financial Services Ranking Member Waters, and the other is from all 4 ranking members expressing their strong opposition to the renewal of staff deposition authority. I join the ranking members of Energy and Commerce, Financial Services, Science, and Ways and Means in opposing the reauthorization, and also ask unanimous consent to insert in the record our views on why. Given such unrestrained blanket powers to such a large number of committees is unprecedented in the history of the House. There are certain times when Congress must use the awesome power to compel American citizens to provide testimony under oath. Subpoena power is an important tool in the oversight responsibilities of the House of Representatives. There are even rare occasions when such compulsory questioning should be conducted by staff instead of members of the House. And when Democrats were in charge, for example, we gave the Education and Labor Committee this sort of authority for the limited purpose of investigating mine health and safety following the Upper Big Branch disaster that killed 29 miners in West Virginia. But those instances should be rare. They should be clearly and specifically authorized, and they should be tightly focused on a particular investigation. Today's resolution continues a process begun last year by the majority of turning what should be a targeted and exceptional power into a routine blanket authority without reference to a specific investigation. Absent a clearly identified investigation that merits the use of this power, we should follow the usual practice of taking witness testimony in open, public proceedings where questions are asked by elected members of Congress. As far as I am aware, no committee other than the Oversight Committee, whose sole purpose is to conduct investigations, has been given this extraordinary and unprecedented sort of blanket deposition authority prior to this Congress. We have done without it for hundreds of years, and we should do so again. As our ranking members have written in their letters to our committee and to Speaker Ryan, Some committees have barely used their staff deposition authority over the past year, raising the question of why it should be extended. And when committees have used this authority over the last year, it has often been abused with the threat of subpoena held over people's heads. I ask my colleagues to reconsider giving this extraordinary power for another year. There are few things that the federal government can do that are more invasive than compelling ordinary citizens to appear and be interrogated behind closed doors by a government official, and it must be done with great care. The authority in this resolution is unprecedented, unnecessary, unwise, and in all the years of the House of Representatives' history, it's never been done. We should not renew this authority. I ask unanimous consent to insert into the record the letters from the four ranking members and also from the minority members on the committee.
Thank you very much. Without objection, we'll enter those record. And I do appreciate the gentlewoman giving me these letters. Is there further discussion? Gentleman's recognized.
Unanimous consent to include in the record with reference to 3762, a letter that was directed to Leader McConnell and Speaker Boehner with copies to Minority Leader Reid and Minority Leader Pelosi. It's from the American College of Nurse Midwives, American Congress of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, the American Medical Women's Association, American Public Health Association, American Society for Reproductive Medicine, and several others. In the interest of time, I won't read them all, but I would like to lift one paragraph from the letter. It says, policies that would exclude Planned Parenthood from public health funding would hurt millions of women and undermine health care access in communities across the country. Approximately 60% of Planned Parenthood patients access through Medicaid and Title X, in addition to those who rely on other essential programs, including maternal and child health programs and centers for disease and prevention, breast and cervical cancer screening programs. In some states, Planned Parenthood is the only provider participating in Title X, and more than 50% of Planned Parenthood health centers are located in a medically underserved or health professional shortage area, because federal law already requires healthcare providers to demonstrate that no federal funds are used for abortion. Prohibitions on funding for preventive care at Planned Parenthood health centers will only devastate access to these life-saving services. And I ask unanimous consent for the full letter, and the supporters of the letter be put in the record, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection, that will be
Thank you,
included
Mr.
into the
Chairman.
record. Thank you very much. Further discussion. As to the discussion that the gentlewoman had concerning the deposition and the rules package several years ago. First of all, I'm very sensitive about that. I've looked at it myself. I've tried to pay attention. I've been in a number of, though not numerous, conversations with what I would say committee chairmen and investigators who are interested in constitutionally living up to their exercise of oversight. Just as when I entered this Congress, was aware of the Honorable John Dingell and his vigorous oversight and his preparation and need to make sure in his role of the things that he had done. I too have been engaged in and was a member of the Government Reform and Oversight Committee when I first came to Congress. The nature by which I have agreed to bring this here is on a recommendation because of what I consider to be an ongoing and continued administrative insistence that they not, I think, follow the rules of not only providing information, how they provide the information, what they do. We even held the Attorney General of the United States in contempt. We've had very vigorous fights. We continue to disagree with this administration, and they continue to disagree with us. And I have believed that it was in the best interest to continue this provision, and thus I did allow it also. If this administration can find a way to work better, I think we should find a way to work better, and that's been unresolved. Second, I know and you know that there have been a number of members of Congress, including Mr. Cummings, who I have had numbers of discussions with about proper protocol, proper information that would be shared, things that were done, and a few members, including Mr. Cummings, have publicly addressed this issue. I think that those times have resulted in both sides reevaluating what they were doing. So it's my hope that we can continue to work together. I will continue to watch this, and I will continue to have a strong opinion also.
For goodness sakes, I'm sorry about that. It sounds like the...
It does sound like that they're...
Let me just reiterate that this is a very serious step.
Yes, ma'am.
We are giving to unelected people the ability to bring a citizen of the United States in and keep them behind doors for 8, 10, whatever they want. I continue to believe that those kinds of hearings should be held in public and questions should be asked by the people who are representatives of the constituencies. And as I pointed out, there are times when we need to do that, and we are capable of, at that time, rising to that occasion when it's necessary to have that kind of deposition authority. But just to blanket give it, I think it will be a tremendous abuse of power. I'm glad you're going to watch it.
Yes, ma'am.
Very carefully, but I do think it's important that the ranking members of those committees show great concern from the experiences that they've had, that this is not a good idea.
Yes, ma'am.
Does anybody else want to speak on that on our side? Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and I appreciate you addressing this issue forthrightly. And I will, as I was looking at Judge Hastings, as I was saying this, I'll continue. And he knows that I have had discussions with members, and he is aware of those discussions also. Further discussions? Seeing none, the vote will now be on the motion, the amendment, the amendment from the gentlewoman from New York. Those in favor of the slaughter amendment, did you make it?
I didn't make an amendment.
Excuse me,
No,
yours was
I
a
did not.
discussion.
Yes, we wanted to express the...
Further
We would,
discussion
however,
or
like to
amendment?
have it out of the rule.
Thank
So
you
why
very-
don't I
that-
make an
that-
amendment to do that?
Well, if that's what you
Let's
choose,
do
I'm
that,
sorry.
all
but
right.
We've had a long discussion, and
All
I took
right,
it that way.
that's fine. I will make an amendment, Mr. Chairman. Move to strike Section 2 of the resolution, reauthorization of committee staff deposition authority.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Those in favor of the slaughter amendment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no.
Roll call, please.
Roll call. Gentlewoman, ask for roll call vote.
Ms. Fox? Ms. Fox, no. Mr. Cole? Mr. Woodall? Mr. Woodall, no. Mr. Burgess? Mr. Burgess, no. Mr. Stivers? Mr. Stivers, no. Mr. Collins? Mr. Collins, no. Mr. Byrne? Mr. Byrne, no. Mr. Newhouse? Mr. Newhouse, no. Ms. Slaughter?
Aye.
Ms. Slaughter, aye. Mr. McGovern? Aye. Mr. McGovern, aye. Mr. Hastings? Mr. Hastings, aye. Mr. Polis? Mr. Polis, aye. Mr. Chairman?
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk will report the total.
4 yeas, 8 nays.
The amendment's not agreed to, not agreed to. Further amendment or discussion? Seeing none, the vote will now be on the motion from the gentlewoman from North Carolina. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. The ayes have it, the ayes have it. Accordingly,
Roll call, please.
gentlewoman asks for a roll call vote.
Ms. Fox? Ms. Fox, aye. Mr. Cole? Mr. Woodall? Mr. Woodall, aye. Mr. Burgess? Mr. Burgess, aye. Mr. Stivers? Mr. Stivers, aye. Mr. Collins? Mr. Collins, aye. Mr. Byrne? Mr. Byrne, aye. Mr. Newhouse? Mr. Newhouse, aye. Ms. Slaughter?
No.
Ms. Slaughter, no. Mr. McGovern? No. Mr. McGovern, no. Mr. Hastings? Mr. Hastings, no. Mr. Polis? No. Mr. Polis, no. Mr. Chairman?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, aye.
Clerk will report the total.
8 yeas, 4 nays.
Motion is agreed to, is agreed to. The gentleman, Mr. Woodall, will be handling this for Republicans,
And this is Mr. McGovern.
and Mr. McGovern will for Democrats. Thank you very much. I now will be in receipt of a motion from the gentlewoman from North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move the committee grant H.R. 712, the Sunshine for Regulatory Decrees and Settlements Act of 2015, a structured rule The rule provides 1 hour general debate with 40 minutes equally divided and controlled by the chair, ranking minority member of the Committee on Judiciary, and 20 minutes equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule makes an order as original text for the purpose of amendment, an amendment in the nature of a substitute, consisting of the text of Rules Committee Print 114-37, and provides that it shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against that amendment in the nature of a substitute. The rule makes an order only those further amendments printed in Part A of the Rules Committee report. Each such amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. The rule waives all points of order against the amendments printed in Part A of the report. The rule provides one motion to recommit with or without instructions. Section 2 of the rule provides for consideration of H.R. 1155, the Scrub Act of 2015. Under a structured rule, the rule provides 1 hour general debate, equally divided among and controlled by the chairs and ranking minority members of the Committee on Judiciary and the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that the bill shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill. The rule makes an order only those amendments printed in Part B of the Rules Committee report. Each such amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. The rule waives all points of order against the amendments printed in Part B of the report. Finally, the rule provides one motion to recommit with or without instructions.
Thank you very much. You've now heard the motion concerning H.R. 1155 Scrub Act and H.R. 712 Regulatory Reform Package. Is there any discussion or amendment to that?
I have an amendment, Mr. Chair.
Gentlewoman's recognized.
I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee grant H.R. 712 and H.R. 1155 each an open rule, so that all members have the opportunity to offer amendments to the bills on the floor.
Thank you very much. Discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
Gentleman's
on that, I
recognized.
would like to, promote this, to also state out this rule provides for separate consideration of each bill under the structured rule with an hour of debate for each. And also just one point, sort of following up on that, the rule makes an order every amendment submitted to each bill that complies with the rules of the House and with the Budget Act. And with that, I will yield back.
Thank you very much. Seeing no further discussion, vote now be on the slaughter amendment. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. Those have it, noes have it.
Roll call,
And
please.
gentlewoman asks for a roll call vote.
Ms. Fox?
No.
Ms. Fox? No. Mr. Cole? Mr. Woodall? Mr. Woodall, no. Mr. Burgess? Mr. Burgess, no. Mr. Stivers? Mr. Stivers, no. Mr. Collins? Mr. Collins, no. Mr. Byrne? Mr. Byrne, no. Mr. Newhouse? Mr. Newhouse, no. Ms. Slaughter?
Aye.
Ms. Slaughter, aye. Mr. McGovern? Mr. McGovern, aye. Mr. Hastings? Mr. Hastings, aye. Mr. Polis? Mr. Polis, aye. Mr. Chairman?
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk will report the total.
4 yeas, 8 nays.
The amendment is not agreed to, further amendment or discussion. See none, vote now be on the motion from the gentleman from North Carolina. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no.
No.
Ayes have it, ayes have it.
Roll call, please.
Gentlewoman asks for a roll call vote.
Ms. Fox?
Aye.
Ms. Fox, aye. Mr. Cole? Mr. Woodall? Mr. Woodall, aye. Mr. Burgess? Mr. Burgess, aye. Mr. Stivers? Mr. Stivers, aye. Mr. Collins? Mr. Collins, aye. Mr. Byrne? Mr. Byrne, aye. Mr. Newhouse? Mr. Newhouse, aye. Ms. Slaughter?
No.
Ms. Slaughter, no. Mr. McGovern? Mr. McGovern, no. Mr. Hastings? Mr. Hastings, no. Mr. Polis? Mr. Polis, no. Mr. Chairman?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, aye.
Clerk will report the total.
8 yeas, 4 nays.
Motion is agreed to, and accordingly, the gentleman, Mr. Collins from Georgia, will be handling this for
Mr.
Republicans,
Polis
and Mr.
for
Polis for Democrats. I want to thank our members for coming back and their hard work today. I know this was a long session, but I'd like to remind us that we will meet tomorrow at 3 o'clock on the litigation reform bill. This subcommittee that will meet will also meet tomorrow morning for a hearing, I think at 11 o'clock. 10:30 for a hearing on biennial budgeting, Mr. Ribble from Wisconsin. So 10:30 and 3 o'clock for Rules Committee time. Thank you very much. This finishes our work for the day.
Okay, we got to do something about this. I have wrote that.